I want to note the presence of a quorum and would like to call the meeting to order. If there's no objection, the opening session agenda is adopted as order of business. As vice chair, I normally run the meetings in Chairman Bryant's absence, and he is not with us today. However, I'm having some difficulty today myself. I got a little post-operation recovery going on and medications, so I don't want the room to start spinning on me while I'm conducting the meeting. So I've asked, and I'm happy to thank Peter May for taking over as chair of the commission today without objection. We'll give it to Peter. Couldn't be in better hands. Let me pass the gavel to you in case you need to bang it down.
No, you can do it.
You never know.
All right, thank you very much. So I have nothing to say on my own. I will go directly to this. Agenda item number 1 is the report of the chairman. And we have no report of the chairman, right? And I certainly have nothing to report. Agenda item number 2 is the report of the executive director, Mr. Acosta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Happy New Year to all. I just have 2 quick things to update you on. As a reminder, the draft environmental impact statement for the Smithsonian South Mall Master Plan is still available for public review. Public comments are due on Tuesday, January 16th, and information and other materials can be found at the NCPC website. Again, you'll be hearing about the EIS and the master plan today, but we want to give the public an opportunity to submit their comments before the deadline. Finally, I'd like to note that NCPC's Chief Operating Officer, Barry Sox, officially retired yesterday. We thank Barry for his 42 years of federal service and his important contributions to NCPC during his tenure here, and we wish him all the best. And I hope he's not watching this on live stream on his first day of retirement.
It's not, he's babysitting his grandchildren.
So we thank him for his work, and that's all I have to report.
Very good. Agenda item number 3 is the legislative update. Ms. Schuyler.
Mr. Chairman, I have nothing to report.
Moving briskly along. Agenda item number 4 is the consent calendar. We have 1 item on the consent calendar. Item 4A is for the preliminary and final approval of building plans for exterior signage at the Hirshhorn Museum submitted by the Smithsonian Institution. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So move.
Is there a second? Okay. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? None. Motion was made by Mr. Dixon and seconded by Ms. Wright, and unanimously carried. First, on the open session agenda item number 5A, approval of comments on the concept master plan and draft EIS alternatives for the South Mall campus plan submitted by the Smithsonian Institution. The Smithsonian has spent the last 3 years developing multiple alternatives for analysis based on public input. I can testify to this because I've been through many meetings, but not all, so I know there's a lot that has happened. The range of alternatives has evolved significantly since the Smithsonian initiated its project in 2015. So I'll turn things over to Mr. Fliss, who will make the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. The Smithsonian Institution has submitted concept plans for the South Mall Campus Master Plan. The Smithsonian proposes the master plan to meet its long-term space requirements and to address physical and operational deficiencies across the campus that impact visitor use and experience, as well as the Smithsonian's ability to effectively and safely implement its programs. This effort is a result of work that began in 2012, at which time the Smithsonian identified comprehensive goals and priorities for the South Mall campus. You may recall that the Smithsonian last gave you an information presentation last September. This review is an opportunity for the Commission to provide comments on the different alternatives for the master plan, and your comments, as well as those received through the environmental review process, which was mentioned earlier, will help inform the preparation of the draft master plan. The draft is expected to return to you later in the spring, at which time the Commission will select a preferred alternative. So as a reminder, the project area is located on the south side of the National Mall between 7th Street and 12th Street, as well as Independence Avenue to the south and Jefferson Drive to the north. The site is a combination of important historic and cultural facilities which form the centerpiece of the Smithsonian Institution on approximately 17 acres. The campus also falls within the National Mall Historic District. Today, the National Mall side of the campus is the source of the majority of visitors. And as a result, the master plan recognizes the need to improve access and wayfinding from the north. However, the campus is also the terminus of 10th Street Southwest, which provides an important visual and physical connection to the southwest waterfront, from the southwest waterfront to the National Mall. The southwest quadrant has been undergoing significant growth, along with a number of planning efforts currently underway led by the District Office of Planning. In fact, the population and number of households are projected to double between now and 2045, and jobs are expected to increase from 80,000 today to nearly 110,000. 30 new developments are also underway, including entertainment, residences, and retail. As such, the campus is located at a critical point where the east-west axis of the National Mall and this north-south corridor leading to the waterfront meet. Through the master planning process, it has the opportunity to better engage the neighborhoods to the south, attracting visitors, residents, and employees. And I'll go into more detail about this context later in the presentation. So here's the existing site plan with Independence Avenue to the south and Jefferson Drive and the National Mall to the north. Most of you have been to the campus, but just as a recap, I will walk quickly through the existing site and the various buildings and gardens to provide some context. First is the Smithsonian Castle, which is the centerpiece of the campus and also an icon on the National Mall. On the west side of the campus, we have the Freer Gallery, which houses one of the premier collections of Asian art. Towards the center of the campus is the Arts and Industries Building, which was the first United States National Museum. On the east side of the campus is the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. And at the center of the campus is the Quadrangle on Hopt Garden, which opened in 1985. This is a 3-story underground complex of museum, auditorium, and office space. The Hopt Garden occupies the roof, which is approximately 4 acres in size. The Sackler Gallery and the National Museum of African Art are entered through 2 pavilions located on top of the quadrangle. These have stairs and elevators that lead down to the museum and other spaces. Finally, we have several other structures and gardens, including the Ripley Center Pavilion and the Catherine Doolin Folger Rose Garden, as well as the Ripley Garden, which is located between the Hirshhorn and the Arts and Industries Building. In terms of process, a draft environmental impact statement, or EIS, has been prepared to evaluate the potential impacts resulting from implementing the master plan. The draft is currently available for public comment, and here NCPC is the lead federal agency for NEPA compliance. And in this case, the Smithsonian works with NCPC where individual projects under the master plan will be submitted to the Commission for approval. In addition, the Smithsonian has also initiated the Section 106 process and has held several consulting parties meetings to discuss the number of historic resources within the campus. The master plan, as I mentioned, is intended to guide development of the campus for the next 20 to 30 years. And as with other master plans reviewed by the Commission, the plan will identify projects to be implemented over time as funding becomes available. Individual projects, again, will require review by you as the Commission. And while the improvements, specific design, and while the master plan will include conceptual renderings and graphics of proposed improvements, the specific designs will be developed at the individual project stage. And as such, the phasing of these projects may impact implementation. And therefore, staff recommends the Commission request the Smithsonian prepare a phasing plan which would be included in the draft master plan submission. To address individual project implementation over time, as well as potential impacts to historic resources, the Smithsonian stakeholders and consulting parties will be developing a programmatic agreement, or a PA, to comply with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. PAs are utilized when the potential effects of undertakings are not yet known, and it will set forth a process for further avoiding, minimizing, or mitigating effects through project design and implementation. And as such, the PA will be a critical roadmap for future actions. So the master plan seeks to guide the short and long-term development of the South Mall while addressing a number of needs across the campus, and these are highlighted in the icons in front of you. These include restoring historic buildings, improving accessibility and connectivity across the campus, enhancing visibility of the below-grade museums, enhancing visitor amenities, modernizing loading, improving security and sustainability, and all the while enhancing the museums and the core services of the Smithsonian. These goals are generally consistent with many of the policies identified in the comprehensive plan, and as such, staff recommends the Commission support the goals of the master plan, which address the Smithsonian's need to meet its long-term space requirements and address physical and operational deficiencies that impact visitor use and experience. So quickly, I'm just going to highlight some of these goals, which include restoring museums, such as the Castle and the Hirshhorn, improving connectivity for visitors, both from the National Mall as well as neighborhoods to the south, recognizing the existing flow of visitors from the National Mall, but also the growth and change occurring to the south, and the potential for an improved entrance from the south. Improving visibility for the various museums and services housed in the campus, in particular the Sackler Gallery and the National Museum of Art, are among the least known due to their below-grade location and limited visibility. Greater visibility from the castle from the south is also an opportunity to emphasize this approach as a new gateway. The master plan also looks at consolidating loading areas and maintaining a high-quality landscape. As part of the NEPA process, the Smithsonian worked with staff and the consulting parties in developing a number of potential alternatives, and these are shown here on the screen in front of you. Alternative D was the first concept created early in the process, while Alternative B was evaluated as a result of discussions with the consulting parties. Alternative F was the last developed, and as a result of feedback through the process. Other alternatives were dismissed from further study, which are marked out on the screen here, due to their impacts or similarity to the other alternatives. So what I'm going to do is give you a high-level overview of the alternatives, first by describing Alternative D and ending with Alternative F. And then I'll provide an overview of the elements common to all alternatives, and then highlight some of the more significant differences. So again, at a high-level overview, Alternative D reflects the Smithsonian's first concept of the master plan. It included some of the most dramatic changes to the campus, including a new park-like setting, a large dip in front of the castle, and a significant amount of excavation. Alternative B was explored as a way to minimize changes. The basic setting of the campus would not be significantly altered. Potential improvements to the campus functions and service would also be minimal. Alternative F was last developed in response to these comments received, and also as a result of Smithsonian's own evaluation of the master plan. So here, looking at Alternative D, again, it includes the most significant changes to the campus, including a large dip, which goes below grade here, approaching from the south, the moving of the existing quadrangle pavilions and construction of new pavilions, and then also significant changes to the Hirshhorn, including removing some of the site walls and changes to the sculpture garden. So here's one of the early renderings of the alternative looking from the southeast. Again, this is perhaps the most radical departure from the existing conditions. Alternative B was explored as a more minimal approach. This alternative includes more limited changes above grade. For example, the pavilions would remain in place, and the flat setting of the castle would as well. Under this alternative, changes above ground would be minimal, but so would campus improvements, particularly to some of the below-grade museums and other spaces. Also, views to the campus and visibility to the museums would not be greatly improved. After reviewing these earlier alternatives, as well as input from stakeholders, the Smithsonian created Alternative F as another approach, minimizing some of the changes which had raised concern, but still trying to maximize improvements to the campus function and service. So in this alternative, the flat approach to the castle is retained along with the parterre on the south side of the castle, while the pavilions are moved and the character of the garden is intended to be retained. Changes to the site walls of the Hirshhorn are also more limited. And here's an early conceptual view of this alternative. So throughout the process, Alternative D in particular generated a significant number of comments and concerns, and while Alternative B was helpful in exploring how to minimize changes, it did not appear to best address some of the master plan goals, such as improving visibility and functionality for museums and services. As such, Smithsonian developed Alternative F to address these major comments by retaining character of the gardens, as well as the flat setting and approach of the garden. Staff further recommends the Commission find that Alternative B and F also minimize the amount of sub-basement excavation, which was another public comment, by accommodating the program elsewhere in the campus. As a result of these changes, Smithsonian feels that alternative F best meets their needs while addressing comments raised through the process. So with that high-level overview, I'm going to describe some of the major project components that are generally consistent across all the alternatives. They include, first, the castle being restored to its period of significance. Over time, many of the large spaces within the castle were infilled with new floors and rooms. The Smithsonian proposes to remove many of the non-historic partitions to return the castle spaces to their original configuration where possible. Much of the existing office space, restrooms, and gift shops would need to be relocated as you're opening up much of the space to allow the Great Hall to be restored. The upper Great Hall, which has also been subdivided, would also be restored. In addition, the Smithsonian has studied the castle to identify potential seismic risks and has determined that seismic protection would be appropriate to help protect the structure and the symbolic center of the institution. As a result, the master plan calls for providing seismic protection to the castle. The specific measures and implementation strategies would be developed at the project level, which would also require additional studies and engineering. And the outcome of these additional studies would not affect the level of detail provided at the master plan. Currently, the castle basement has low ceilings and also the insertion of significant utilities and mechanical systems that makes the space challenging to use. The variety of changes and interventions over time have also hidden much of the castle's original structure. The master plan calls for relocating the mechanical, plumbing, and electrical systems and restoring much of the interior space. This will require lowering the basement level several feet and then allowing this level to become publicly accessible and provide interpretive opportunities in coordination with the new visitor center, which I'll discuss in a minute. And so on the right, you can see an early rendering how the space might look. The master plan also proposes a new below-grade visitor center. This would be generally located between the castle basement and the quadrangle building, which is again below grade here. It will connect to the restored castle, which I mentioned, which will be accessible to the public. The visitor center would help accommodate some of the services that must be relocated due to the restoration of the castle, including the restrooms, cafe, and gift shop, which I mentioned earlier. Access to the visitor center would be provided through stairs, ramps, or pavilions, and additional daylighting could be provided to the underground spaces. The Smithsonian believes that locating the center adjacent to the castle is important because its iconic image is well known to visitors who would seek services in that location. Further, the proposed location between the castle and the quadrangle would allow for below-grade connectivity between the various museums and services. Currently, the campus is served by several loading areas. Each of these is accessed from Independence Avenue Southwest. The quadrangle loading area here is located below grade, just east of the Freer Gallery. There's an entrance ramp that accesses it there. Another loading area is located in a surface parking lot next to the Arts and Industries building. And then finally, the Hirshhorn Museum has a ramp near 7th Street. The Smithsonian seeks to consolidate loading where possible to meet their current facility needs, future facility needs, and to eliminate ramps in these parking areas that break up the campus visually. These areas could also become additional garden spaces in the future. A new underground loading area would be accessed from the ramp, which I just mentioned, west of the Freer Gallery. This loading area would be located at a sub-basement level, partially located beneath the west end of the castle. And the Smithsonian has noted that the connection to the Hirshhorn Museum to this new floating facility would be challenging due to the 9th Street Tunnel, which is located here. A permit from the district's Public Space Committee would be necessary to accommodate the new curb cut, and Smithsonian has applied for that permit discussion in early 2018. Additional coordination would be necessary with the District Department of Transportation to address traffic and intersection impacts related to any new loading configurations. And I'll mention that loading generally occurs after hours and is planned in advance. The master plan also proposes the creation of a new underground central utility plant to serve the campus. This new facility will be modern and more energy efficient and allow the Smithsonian to better control climate systems and services for visitors, staff, and critical museum collections. Underground utilities across the campus would also be upgraded. Here you can see some analysis performed by the Smithsonian, which expects a substantial energy and cost savings in addition to improved ability to control campus systems. The Smithsonian has also indicated that one of the goals of the master plan is to increase east-west connectivity across the campus and to help increase general accessibility for those of all mobility levels. For example, currently the Freer Gallery is the only museum that does not have an entrance facing the Hop Garden and the quadrangle here. In addition, the wheelchair accessible entrance of the Freer is located off Independence Avenue, and those who use this entrance must ring a bell to gain entry. The master plan proposes to add another accessible entrance on the east facade facing the Hop Garden. With the removal of the quadrangle loading area, which I just mentioned, this new entrance would allow direct access between the Freer Gallery and the garden. In addition, it will allow for the establishment of that west to east connection, which I mentioned. Here you can see the rendering of the existing wall, and this is a concept of how the new entrance could look. On the northwest side of the campus, the Ripley Center is entered from a pavilion, which is located between the castle and the Freer Gallery. The master plan proposes to remove the pavilion to permit improved views and pedestrian access from Jefferson Drive and the National Mall into the center of the campus, and this view will help assist visitors in recognizing the presence of the other museums and gardens located south of the castle. Access to the center's facilities would be provided through the quadrangle and the visitor center. The Smithsonian has indicated that the Arts and Industries building will continue as a flexible space for temporary exhibitions and public events. At this time, the building has been identified as a potential location for other museum uses, but no final determination has been made. Because the building and its historic character make it a prime candidate for museum use over the next 20 to 30 years, staff suggests the Commission request the master plan indicate the conversion of the Arts and Industries building into a museum use is reasonably foreseeable as a long-term project, regardless of the final occupant. And then further, the master plan should describe any implications for such a use. The master plan also calls for the restoration of the Hirshhorn building, and the exact details again would be identified as the project is developed. I'll describe potential changes to the sculpture garden a little bit later in the presentation. And then finally, the master plan also calls for updates and improvements to the perimeter security. Again, details will be developed with the design of the project, and Jefferson Drive will remain in its current configuration. In general, staff finds that these projects will support the Smithsonian Institution's long-term needs. They will also help enhance the visitor experience and help modernize the campus. As such, staff recommends the Commission support these components as they help improve visitor service, increase access across the campus, and modernize facilities, while recognizing that program and functionality must be balanced with historic preservation, planning, and urban design goals. And as I noted, the specific designs for each project will be developed as funding becomes available, and these details will be critically important in successfully implementing each project while minimizing any negative impacts. So while the alternatives share a number of similar elements, there are several more significant differences that primarily deal with the amount of above-ground changes. First, I'm going to discuss the quadrangle building and pavilions. The quadrangle building, as I mentioned, includes 345,000 square feet on 3 floors located below grade between the Castle, Freer, and Arts and Industries building. This is highlighted here in red. It includes educational, office, support, and museum space, and as it also provides an opportunity for connectivity both above and below grade because of this location. On the left, you can see the building under construction in the 1980s. And over time, this area has been a parking lot and occupied by sheds before becoming what it is today. Today, the Sackler Gallery and the National African Art Museum, again, are accessed through these 2 pavilions, which are an above-grade extension of the quadrangle building. They include stairs and elevators leading down to the museum spaces below grade. The Hop Garden forms the roof of the building. And while the quadrangle and pavilions are contributing to the National Mall Historic District, the quadrangle building itself was found not eligible for listing in the National Register. The Smithsonian seeks to make the Castle, Sackler, and National African Art entrances more visible to the public, particularly from the National Mall, as well as to increase functionality below grade museum spaces and to improve visibility from the south. Visitor studies show that these below grade museums have are known less than their larger counterparts on the mall. And the context of the pavilions has changed over time, even from when they were first completed. And further, the context continues to change. The Southwest Eco District Plan, along with the Maryland Avenue Small Area Plan, considered how the area south of the South Mall campus could be redeveloped, the existing federal facilities could be redeveloped as a sustainable mixed-use community. The Commission also recently approved upgrades to Banneker Park to help facilitate the pedestrian and bicycle connection, which leads down 10th Street to the waterfront. At the same time, there are a number of other projects, such as the International Spy Museum, as well as the wharf development, which are either under construction or nearing completion. And other cultural uses, like the new Anthem Theater and Arena Stage, have a natural nexus with the cultural uses of the Smithsonian. As such, staff recommends the Commission find that the master plan must consider the context of a changing city, particularly the Southwest Eco District and waterfront, which will change the character of Independence Avenue and the southern approach to the campus. This changing context suggests the campus can be an important connection between the mall and the city in a way that is currently not. As I mentioned before, many planning efforts, including those led by the district, as well as the Southwest Eco District, have already seen significant changes. No longer is 10th Street just a back entrance to the mall. In the future, it could be a green boulevard, as shown here through the Southwest Eco District plan. And in addition, the Forrestal building may one day be reconfigured to allow open views to the north and the south. These new views, as well as wider views of the castle, could enhance the connection. Also, placing the visitor center on the south will strengthen this relationship. And then finally, I'll note that the new District of Columbia zoning regulations would allow future private development in these sites to be taller and closer to Independence Avenue, further changing the context. So with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the functionality of the quadrangle. They do have implications for both views and connectivity, but importantly, they also impact the functionality of the below-grade quadrangle spaces. On the right, you can see Alternative B, which keeps the pavilions, highlighted here, in their current location. The Smithsonian believes that this would not, retaining this location would not greatly improve the function of the quadrangle interior, as the public spaces and circulation cores could not be connected to the visitor center or the castle. This lack of connectivity does not allow for an efficient floor plan and requires the public to pass through back-of-house functions, which are located here. By contrast, in Alternative D and F, new pavilions are built closer to the castle and smaller in size, and shift the vertical circulation course to the north, connecting them with the public spaces of the visitor center, including the new entrances to the Sackler Gallery and African Art Museum. The new pavilions would then allow the remainder of the quadrangle space to be rationalized in a more functional way. All public areas would then be directly connected and back-of-house functions would be separated. This layout allows for the consolidation of screening as well at the new visitor center. So the visitor center and pavilions, as shown conceptually here, would provide a centralized location to enter the museums and enhance visitor awareness of their presence. Smithsonian also believes consolidating visitor services and the multiple entrances will be more intuitive and also more functional for the public. The location of the pavilions, in conjunction with removal of the Ripley Pavilion, would also allow views from the National Mall into the new entrances. Again, the Smithsonian has indicated that allowing visitors to see the presence of the National African Art Museum and Sackler Gallery entrances is important. New pavilion locations would provide wayfinding as viewed from the National Mall, and therefore staff recommends the Commission find that the new pavilion locations would create greater visibility for the Sackler Gallery and National African Art Museum. So here you can see the existing view towards the quadrangle with the Ripley Pavilion in the foreground. And this is, again, an image showing the Ripley Pavilion removed and new museum entrances in the front and the back. Again, the design of the pavilions is to be determined, but new locations would have a more visual prominence. The pavilion locations also have implications for views of the castle and visibility and connectivity to the neighborhoods from the south. Alternative B retains the current locations as seen in this recent image from 10th Street and Independence Avenue. As viewed from the south, the pavilions hide the west and east wings of the castle. Here you can see the same view rendered as a line drawing. In Alternative D and F, again, the new pavilions are located closer to the castle. They are reduced in size by about 30%, and as a result, more complete views of the castle are possible from the south. As such, staff recommends the Commission find that smaller relocated pavilions could improve views of the castle and the National Mall from the south and guide visitors from the southwest quadrant of the city including the Southwest Eco District, the Wharf, and Waterfront, which are connected along 10th Street Southwest and are undergoing tremendous growth. The Smithsonian has also explored how to further express the form of new pavilions, but as I've noted, specific designs of all the project elements would be developed later in the future. Given the impacts of both views and functions, staff therefore recommends the Commission find that the current location of the pavilions affects the configuration and functionality of the below-grade quadrangle interior spaces, as well as views to the castle from Independence Avenue and 10th Street to the south. Improving views of the castle along with the new visitor center on axis with 10th Street will enhance the connection to the southwest quadrant, and this is highlighted here in this diagram. Another difference among the alternatives is the treatment of the hopped garden, which is the roof of the quadrangle building, and over 30 years old, it is nearing the end of its life. When it is replaced, the existing garden will be removed. Today, the garden provides a view to and setting for the castle as seen from the south. Through the engagement process, many members of the public have expressed their strong support for the garden, and as such, staff recommends the Commission find the garden provides a view to and setting for the castle as seen from the south. And further, the intimate character and scale of the existing garden is a beloved component of the South Mall campus, and is also an important counterpoint to the scale and openness of the National Mall. Alternative B essentially retains the existing configuration and character of the gardens, while Alternative D, shown here, with its large sloped entry, would result in a more open park-like setting. Alternative F would retain some of the characteristics of the curtain garden, including the parterre, but would not recreate the exact layout. Staff finds that Alternative D, again shown here, most dramatically changes the setting of the castle, and therefore recommends the Commission not support the large sloped entry in this alternative, as it would greatly change the character of the garden and the setting of the castle. Staff finds that it is possible to create a balanced approach that generally meets Smithsonian's goals while maintaining the intimate character of the existing gardens through site configuration, appropriate landscaping, as well as maintaining the Renwick gates, which help define and enclose the space along Independence Avenue. While the Smithsonian will not develop the specific design for many years, staff suggests the Commission recommend the future design of the garden balance the desire to maintain an intimate character and scale with the need to improve the quadrangle building and desire for greater access and visibility across the campus. While replacing the garden in kind would retain the exact configuration, it may also preclude some of the improvements that Smithsonian is trying to achieve, including daylighting the quadrangle building, which is shown here, and also improving the visibility for Sackler and National African Art entrances. As such, staff recommends the Commission find that while the master plan will not include a specific design for the gardens, changes in circulation, vertical access, and daylighting of the quadrangle building will influence the future garden design. At this time, Smithsonian believes Alternative F best balances preserving the setting of the castle and the character of the gardens while improving the functionality of the quadrangle building and increasing visibility for the Sackler Gallery and National African Art Museums. Staff notes that the Smithsonian has also publicly committed to maintaining the intimate character and high-quality landscape of the garden as the design is developed in the future. Finally, I'm going to conclude with a discussion of the changes proposed to the Hirshhorn site and the sculpture garden. The master plan proposes to rehabilitate the Hirshhorn Museum building, and in addition, it seeks to improve connectivity between the museum and the rest of the campus. Currently, a perimeter wall surrounds much of the site here, with openings to the north and south, respectively. A small accessible entrance is located at the northwest corner here. The master plan proposes to add an opening in the western site wall here, to allow for a direct pedestrian access from the east doors of the Arts and Industries building to the Hirshhorn Museum site. The elimination of the Arts and Industries building loading area, which I mentioned earlier, would also facilitate this connection and allow the gardens to expand. Alternative D proposed the most substantial changes to the site walls, while alternatives B and F limit the opening to that necessary only for pedestrian connection. Because the sense of enclosure is integral to the character of the site, staff recommends the Commission find that a modest opening in the western site wall would facilitate pedestrian connections to the Arts and Industries building, while a larger alteration of the wall will change the character of the Hirshhorn Museum site. And so here you can see the existing view looking towards the west. And here is a view with a limited pedestrian connection between the Hirshhorn and Arts and Industries. Alternative B, again, generally limits other improvements to restoration and the reestablishment of the below-grade tunnel, which connects the Hirshhorn Museum building and the Sculpture Garden. This connection passes below Jefferson Drive, and any changes would require further coordination with the National Park Service. Staff recommends that the Commission support reestablishing this existing connection between the museum and the Sculpture Garden. Alternatives D and F propose more substantial changes to the Sculpture Garden, including a new below-grade gallery space and widening the existing tunnel here. Given the potential scope of these changes, staff recommends the Commission request the Smithsonian provide additional details, including sections that describe the proposed expansion of the tunnel and the addition of gallery space below the Sculpture Garden, as indicated in alternatives D and F, so that the Commission may better understand how the potential impacts to the setting and views of the mall. So as I mentioned previously, the purpose of the concept review is for the Commission to provide comments here on the various alternatives, as well as Smithsonian's preference at this point. Your comments, as well as those received through the draft environmental impact statement process comment period, will help inform and guide the selection of the NEPA preferred alternative and the preparation of the draft master plan. As I mentioned earlier, the draft master plan is expected to return to the Commission later on this spring, at which time the Commission will select a preferred alternative. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all the details of the Executive Director's recommendation. I will have it here for your review. Members of the Smithsonian are here, as well as their consultant team, to help answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fliss. Does the Commission have any questions for Mr. Fliss at this point? No? I do have one, which is that the EDR makes reference to renovation and restoration of the castle, and the word renovation sets off some alarm bells for the National Park Service and the concern about keeping with the Secretary of the Interior standards. So I'm wondering if you could address that question. I mean, is the intention still with the castle to stick with the Secretary of the Interior standards?
I believe so. We had flagged that term as well. It's probably best to have Smithsonian respond, but
okay. So, well, we'll hold on that for the moment. I think our next step, if there are no other questions from the Commission, I think Al Horvath, who's the Smithsonian's Undersecretary for Finance and Administration and CFO, is here to provide brief comments. So, welcome, Mr. Horvath.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, members of the Commission, consulting party partners, and members of the public. My team and I appreciate the opportunity to take this important next step in securing your acceptance of our master plan for the Smithsonian South Mall campus. This plan will serve as a coherent guide for the development of future capital projects over the next several decades. And thanks, Mr. Fliss, for your excellent synopsis of the project. We are committed to address the items included in the Executive Director's recommendation document in our next submission of the draft master plan. These include a draft phasing plan, additional information on the implications of future museum program use for the Arts and Industries building, and additional details about the proposed changes to the Hirshhorn Sculpture Garden. Likewise, we share the goal of maintaining the intimate character and scale of the Hauptgarden in the future design of its reconfigured and expanded footprint. As to the future of Arts and Industries, we are presently seeking private support for regular programming in the building, including exhibitions, public programs, and special events. A permanent use requires significant additional funding from Congress within a very constrained resource environment and competes against other high-priority capital needs across the Smithsonian. Our focus at present is to enable regular programming in AIB until a permanent use is identified and a funding strategy for full interior renovation has been developed. The South Mall is at the heart of the Smithsonian and home to our most historic buildings and treasured gardens. It is a natural first stop for orienting visitors. Indeed, many first-time visitors, like myself back in 1978, automatically assume that the castle is the Smithsonian. It's home to 5 museums and galleries, the center of our central educational programs, the center of governance and operations for the Smithsonian, and a local destination for those who work in offices to the south of the mall and to an increasing number of residents and visitors at the southwest waterfront. Our objective with this master plan is to ensure that all of these key activities function at their best in the future. We've undertaken this planning effort recognizing that each of the facilities included will need a significant investment and revitalization over the coming years. This is a moment in time when we can think about these buildings holistically and create an even better experience for the millions of visitors who take advantage of what we have to offer. The goals of the master plan are, and have been from the beginning, the following: castle restoration with increased public space, central loading and a shared mechanical plant that will allow us to reduce our energy use and cut our energy costs for these facilities by 50%. Quad Museum entrances relocated closer to the mall, from which 75% of our visitors enter. Replacement of the quad roof membrane, which is reaching the end of its useful life. An expansion of the area devoted to the Hauptgarten. East-west campus circulation at grade from the Freer to the Hirshhorn. An accessible Freer entrance. Below-grade connectivity of the castle and quad education, visitor amenities, and museums with ample natural daylight. Support for interim and permanent programming in the Arts and Industries building. Increased space for classes, events, dining, and other daytime and evening activities that we expect will be a welcome addition to a more active, mixed-use community to the south. And finally, updated perimeter and building security. Most of the changes and all of the increases to the total amount of space will occur below grade or within the interiors of buildings listed on the National Register. We intend to retain specific features of the present garden, such as the Renwick gates and the central parterre, as well as the intimate character of the garden and spectacular horticultural display that offer a wonderfully complementary experience to the openness of the National Mall. In each plan alternative explored, it will be necessary to remove the garden and soil and replace the waterproof membrane above the quad, which is leaking currently at some locations. At approximately 40 years of age, the quadrangle roof will need to be replaced in the near future. This type of roof cannot be repaired or replaced from below. This work must be done from above to provide the best protection for the valuable collections housed below, as well as to maintain the structure's integrity. We have held several public sessions with many stakeholders and interested parties. We have listened carefully, and we have adjusted our plan in response to many of the important concerns and recommendations that have been made. We are not seeking change for change's sake, but we have kept our constant focus on the objectives that I reviewed earlier. Our team believes that the current plan version, Alternative F, achieves those goals and addresses the most significant concerns raised. Once again, thank you for your consideration, the support of the NCPC staff, and the public for their participation in this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horvath. We also have three people signed up to speak. First up is Stephen Hansen, representing the Committee of 100. Is Stephen here? Yes. Mr. Hansen, you'll have 5 minutes to present your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Hansen. I am chairman of the Committee of 100 on the Federal City. I appreciate your opportunity, providing the committee with a brief opportunity to present our thoughts on the proposed Smithsonian South Mall Campus Master Plan. We support some aspects of it, none more so than the restoration of the sadly neglected Smithsonian Castle. That being said, we find other elements problematic. As my time is brief, I wish to frame our concerns around 3 issues. 1, the proposed destruction of the Quadrangle Historic District. 2, the possible destruction of the Hirshhorn Museum Plaza perimeter walls. And 3, the Smithsonian's refusal to make wise and better use of the 1881 Arts and Industries building. Issue 1. Central to every design alternative under consideration is demolishing the above-grade architecture and landscape of the Quadrangle Historic District, replacing it with a banal landscape design purportedly in the spirit of the original. Comprised of the Enid A. Hauptgarten, its 3 pavilions, and the James Renwick design gates, the above-grade Quadrangle Historic District is apparently viewed by the Smithsonian as not historically worth preserving. The committee disagrees. In fact, so do many others, including the District of Columbia's Historic Preservation Review Board, which listed it as a local historic landmark in April of last year, as did the National Park Service in its recent updating of the National Register of Historic Places listing for the National Mall, as did nationally recognized American architectural history scholars from the University of Virginia, Boston University, and the George Washington University, as have the national offices of the Garden Club of America and the Garden Conservancy. Family members of Smithsonian Secretary Dillon Ripley and philanthropist Enid A. Haupt, and over 2,500 citizens nationwide who signed and continue to sign the online petition entitled Save the Haupt Garden. The Quadrangle Historic District is historically significant mid-20th century chapter in the Smithsonian's 175-year presence on the National Mall. It is a physical manifestation of Dillon Ripley's tenure, regarded by many as the institution's greatest secretary. It is a gift to the nation of noted American philanthropist and landscape enthusiast Enid A. Haupt, whose generosity this master plan proposes to destroy, in certain violation of her stated stipulations for the endowment. The quadrangle does not need to be destroyed. Leaking roofs below the quad can be repaired from below. We need look no further than the remediation of the leaking underground station ceilings now underway in Washington's metro system. The technology does exist. As to the Smithsonian's goal of opening up vistas and making the south side of the castle precinct a more welcoming entrance from Independence Avenue, or being able to see the Washington Monument, this would be acceptable if it is achievable without major destruction of significant historic properties. However, this is not the case here. There is no tabula rasa, there is no blank slate. We fear that the Smithsonian's current leadership has become so enthralled with marking its own tenure with new capital projects that it has lost its way in terms of preserving the built heritage of its own history. The appropriate design approach sorely needed for this entire undertaking must be one of subtle, balanced, and responsive contextual additions and changes to historically significant landscapes and architecture. And when affected adversely by construction, they should be restored or repaired, not replaced. Point 2, the Hirshhorn Museum. Several design alternatives have been considered, and many still are under consideration, with wholesale demolition of all or most of the plaza walls surrounding the museum and Fountain Court. This is justified under the misguided opening up and welcoming rubric previously raised. Dedicated in 1974 and designed by prominent American architect Gordon Bunshaft, the Hirshhorn Museum is widely regarded as a nationally significant 20th century architectural monument. The plaza fountain, surrounding walls, and the drum itself are one piece, an inseparable significant design whole. Proposing the demolition of so integral and large an element of Bunshaft's design evidences an arrogance and cavalier disregard for one of America's prominent 20th century architects and world-class museums. This option should have never been considered by any of the master plan design alternatives and must be taken off the table. I'm going to conclude. Point 3, the 1881 Arts and Industry Building is a troubling elephant in the room as the Smithsonian appears to squander this much-admired historic building, not by integrating it into the master plan, despite the significant public dollars recently spent on its exterior restoration. When challenged by why the historic structure is not part of the plan, Smithsonian responses have been vague and evasive, usually redounding to some bromide of Congress's recusing it for the site of the National Museum of the American Latino. More recently, the story is slated for changing exhibition space for the yet unlaunched Museum of Technology Innovation. The committee encourages NCPC to press this point now in these deliberations and require the Arts and Industry Building to be better integrated into the master plan, securing it for its use for future generations and reducing significantly overall South Mall costs and destruction of the Quadrangle Historic District. Simply put, this project is too important, there are too many variables still in play, and too many questions left unanswered for NCPC to approve the master plan. We have the time. Let's do it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Hold your place for just a second. I appreciate your truncating your testimony. Of course, we have the written version of it, so we've all been able to read that. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Hanson? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next is Sylvia Kappas. Ms. Kappas, welcome. You'll have 3 minutes to provide your testimony.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm really grateful for the ambient temperature in this room because now I have fully defrosted. My name is Sylvia Kappas, and I set up the online petition to save Hop Garden. I'm here as a member of the community affected by the proposed changes to the South Campus. As a resident of Southwest DC, I'm proud that this jewel of a garden is part of our neighborhood. It is truly one of the few public spaces that attracts both tourists and residents. I am keenly aware of the mixed record of urban development in the Southwest Quadrant, and I applaud the effort to link to the new infrastructure. However, as we know from Southwest's previous experience in the 1950s and 60s, that modernity can come at a high cost. When I first read of the proposed master plan, I was appalled that it ignored the garden's relevance to public cultural resources, education, environmental stewardship, and urban design, all vital pieces in sustaining healthy city spaces. I am glad to see that there has been much effort to accommodate the structural improvements while retaining the garden's character and scale. However, the presentation shows that much remains undetermined. As of January 2018, the petition to save Hop Garden has garnered over 2,500 signatures. The petition went live in April 2016, and in 4 days, we hit our goal of 1,000 signatures. Signatures came from all over the U.S. as well as overseas. The petition was covered in local media, such as the Washington Post and the popular blogs Prince of Popville and Curb DC. The signatories' comments reflect the importance of Hop Garden. People wrote of engagements, lunchtime meditations, and for one respondent, solace during illness. One important point I'd like to highlight is that of preserving Enid Hop's legacy. Enid Hop was a remarkable and generous woman. Far less than half of 1% of National Historic Landmarks and monuments are named after or associated with women. It's a disgrace to think of eliminating a public space named after a highly regarded patron of American gardens. Enid Hop does not deserve the historical erasure that has happened to so many other American women. I'd like to close on a personal note. I've taken our son to Hop Garden many times, and he actually refers to it as Mommy's Garden. His daycare visited the Smithsonian on a weekly basis. Hop Garden is a familiar place to him and part of the diverse cultural landscape in which we decided to raise him. Ultimately, I want my son to understand the difference between a playground and a garden, an important distinction to instill at a young age, and as you know, crucial for institutional longevity. I'm heartened to hear the Smithsonian's commitment to preserving the intimate scale and character of Hop Garden and the rest of the campus. And yet, I remain unconvinced. To paraphrase a contemporary philosopher, let's not pave paradise and put up a parking lot. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Ms. Kappas? Seeing none, thank you very much. And so our third speaker is Ann Petri, representing the Garden Club of America. I hope I got that name correct. We'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. On a day like today, I'm pleased to be speaking with you about gardens, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm president of the Garden Club of America, and I speak on behalf of our 200 clubs and nearly 18,000 club members around the country. Founded in 1913, the Garden Club of America has long been an advocate for the preservation of historically and culturally significant landscapes. We submit to you that the Quadrangle District is one of those landscapes. And in the face of vague promises by the Smithsonian, we believe it is premature to move forward with any programmatic agreement and urge you to delay any decision. Thousands of citizens and a wide array of organizations have raised serious concerns, as you've heard today, about the Smithsonian's $2 billion master plan, and most especially the demolition of the Enid A. Hop Garden, the Carillon Pavilions, and Renwick Gates. Over many months, the Smithsonian has responded with numerous presentations and a head-spinning array of alternatives. However, there is no favored option which clearly and definitively answers what will be done with the Hop Garden. Indeed, the master plan essentially engages the historic landscape as an afterthought, and we are left with vague promises that the Houck Gardens character will be preserved. In response to our first letter in May 2016, Secretary Skorton stated that the ultimate design will not be developed until renovation of the quadrangle begins in the next 5 to 10 years. He said, "We are committed to providing a handsome garden that will sustain the elements that have made the current configuration so special." In his most recent response, the Secretary writes that we are committed to maintaining the character and many features of the Enid A. Houck Garden. Far from addressing concerns raised by parties under Section 106, the Smithsonian responses and various alternatives offer vague and often conflicting representations. Those of us who care deeply about the iconic and beloved Houck Garden want reassurance from the Smithsonian that the quadrangle district will be essentially preserved and that Mrs. Houck's clear intent will be followed. In the absence of that clarity, we ask the Commission to delay action. We understand that this is a concept plan, but given the vast taxpayer dollars involved and the many vague proposals, we urge you, go slow, get this right. It is noteworthy that documents disclosed in a FOIA request outline a long courtship between then Secretary Ripley and Mrs. Houck, and I should say her lawyers, as the Smithsonian sought a $3 million endowment for, in Secretary Ripley's words, a garden for the ages to front the castle building and to serve as a gateway to Secretary Ripley's new complex. And I'd like to note that Mrs. Houck's great niece, Alexandra Grobert, is with us today. The Commission's agreeing to one of the various undefined alternatives would, we fear, effectively give the Smithsonian the green light to proceed with plans that ultimately undermine Mrs. Houck's and Secretary Ripley's clear vision. We also urge you to question the Smithsonian's determination, outlined by Secretary Skorton in his letter to us, that, and I quote, "This project is most cost-effectively done as a holistic and efficient plan that addresses the significant needs of multiple museums, public programs, and visitor services," end quote. Given a projected cost of more than $2 billion, with $5 million expended on the master plan alone, and no likelihood of construction anytime soon, it makes sense to explore other and more affordable approaches that would allow the Smithsonian to preserve an historic space and properly address the concerns posed here and in other proceedings. We raise these issues as sincere and longtime friends and supporters of the Smithsonian. The core images and slides of the Archives of American Gardens were a gift from the Garden Club of America in 1992. The Pollinator Garden, adjoining the National Museum of Natural History, was created in 1995 and significantly expanded in 2000, thanks to the funding from the Garden Club of America and the Smithsonian Women's Committee. The current Smithsonian exhibit, which I recommend highly, Cultivating America's Gardens, outlines the long and important history of gardens and relies upon the Garden Club of America's documentation. Just as it helps preserve America's garden history, we ask the Smithsonian to preserve its own garden. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Does the Commission have any questions? Thank you very much, Ms. Petri. So I will note at this point, that's the end of our speakers. I would note that the Commission has received several letters that were either distributed in advance or were at your place today. You did receive 2 copies of one of them. I think the first copy lacked part of the, like one page was missing, so that's been redistributed. The Smithsonian has publicly indicated that alternative F is their preference. However, today the Commission is only providing comments on draft alternatives. The Commission will select a preferred alternative after the public comment period is closed for the draft EIS and when the draft master plan is back for review. So our actual decision-making related to this will not come until sometime in the spring. Before I just open things up for Commission discussion, I think actually it might be helpful to have a couple of questions answered by Smithsonian. So I have 2 that I'll ask right away, and then and you can bring up whoever you think is appropriate to answer these questions. Specifically, if you could speak to the question of renovation versus restoration, and then also if you could enlighten us a bit on your understanding of the roof repair and what truly is feasible, given that we had testimony indicating that a different, less invasive approach may work.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. May. My name is Ann Trowbridge. I'm Associate Director for Planning at the Smithsonian. On your first question, it is Smithsonian policy to comply in our preservation work with the Secretary of Interior standards in all of our work with our existing historic buildings. And those provide for different levels, including restoration and renovation. And the reason we call this restoration and renovation is because there are some areas, such as the basement, which has already been substantially altered over years, that must be more of a renovation in order to allow public use, with the floor lowered and spaces that were once behind the scenes made more public. So we did do a more detailed discussion at one of our consulting parties meeting about the castle, where we indicated the type of treatment, the period of significance, and those details. And we can include more of that information in our draft master plan submission, and we can also provide the commission with a link to that information. But that is why there are different kinds. Certainly, spaces like the Great Hall would be restoration.
Right. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that answer. We'll look for that additional information. As to the roof?
The quadrangle roof is a green roof. It is more than 30 years old now. By the time it's replaced, it will be about 40 years, give or take. That's an expected lifetime for a roof membrane. It is already leaking. It is difficult to find the leaks. We have pans above ceilings. It is critical that it be replaced properly, and that involves removing it, removing the garden, removing the soil, and pulling up that rubbery membrane and putting down a whole new one. It's continuing to patch, which we have done, would not be the appropriate stewardship of the building. We have done some reports on the roof, and perhaps we could also upload those to the website for those who are interested.
So can you speak specifically to the suggestion that the strategy that's being used by Metro in some of their tunnel leak repairs
We're not a
could be
tunnel.
used here? I understand that,
yeah.
but it's...
I don't know their strategy, but I think the type of roof we have was not designed to be repaired from below. We are, if you did that, you would be allowing the water to get to the steel in the concrete and structure above, and that would eventually rust and fail.
Right. So no, you don't, as I understand it, you were saying also you don't know exactly where the penetrations of the membrane are.
It's hard to find
Right.
currently.
So
We
it-
have had some projects where there's had to be some digging.
Right.
to
So I'm not
uncover
familiar
the
with
leak.
Metro strategy, but I imagine since it's bare exposed concrete, they're using some sort of grouting solution from below. And I
Yeah.
imagine that might be difficult to do given the nature of your roof.
It would be, and valuable art collections are not stored in the Metro either, so we
I
would
understand
like
that.
to.
Nobody wants to have water in their building,
No.
no matter what. We understand that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so other questions? That's all right.
I have a question about the gift. Was there a condition put on Ms. Hope's gift to the Smithsonian when the negotiations were ongoing that about her gift and Secretary Ripley's vision and all that? Was it a condition that was?
There was no stipulation that the Smithsonian could not renovate and change the quadrangle building. Her gift was for the garden, which is the green roof of the building.
Right.
And it did not speak to, as far as I know, the issue of when you have to change the building, replace the roof in any specific way. And
So it was for an endowment, and I assume that meant for perpetuity. Usually endowments have some definition.
Yes.
And for $3 million, I can't imagine that there wasn't some robust conversation
Yeah.
about this.
I am not a development officer or attorney specializing
we
in
hear
gift
about
law,
that from
but we
Mr.
believe that we are honoring the Haupt gift.
The specific gift agreement did not specify a particular garden style, et cetera. We are not advocating or suggesting that there will not be a Haupt garden in the future. In fact, our current preferred alternative would actually expand the footprint of that garden. And based on a number of the comments and the feedback we've received through this process, we are committed to retaining a number of the elements that exist today in the expanded garden.
So, and do we know what her family or descendants think about the new plan? Have they been consulted?
To my
We have heard at, for instance, the HPRB building from her grandniece. Mrs. Haupt did not designate a family member to speak about the ongoing stewardship of the garden on her behalf in an official way.
Okay.
So to be very clear, the expectation is that the Haupt garden, as it exists today, will exist in the future, that critical and beloved elements of the garden that exists today will continue in the future. In fact, we're making the commitment to actually expand the size and reach of that garden. Gardens are a very important element to what the Smithsonian considers its mission to be.
Okay. I have a second, this isn't a question, a comment. As the EDR reads, it does very artfully note that the A&I building can be presumed to be eventually used by the Smithsonian, but I would like to associate myself with the comments of one of the what do we call them? Testifiers. That's kind of seems really, I mean, I'm glad we're going that far in the EDR. I'd like to go further in pushing some decision on this building, since so much money's been already spent, and it does feel a little odd that we don't know, and a little convenient to exclude.
That's right. Are you asking this as a question? Because I see Mr. Horvath coming to the dais to try to
I'm making a
respond.
comment. I'm not asking a question.
So, all right.
Okay.
So we're still in the question phase for the Smithsonian. I guess, does anybody else have questions of the Smithsonian at this stage?
I do have one more question.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a
Good.
comment. I went out of order.
Well, no, that's okay.
My last question is, can we
I
hear
haven't
a
had to
little
use
bit
the gavel,
about,
so.
Harrington said you were going to threaten me.
Got the graph. Yeah, that's why he gave it to me. Sorry.
My question is about the seismic analysis. So can you, we have a paragraph on it, and it's not as, can you talk about the base isolation, and has it been, can you just give me the gist of has it been eliminated? We're talking about, we're leaving it up to, as I believe it should be, specific measures obviously should be developed as we go along, but can you talk about the base isolation and
Sure.
what happened with that analysis?
We are currently engaged in further structural engineering studies which will support the eventual design of the castle restoration and renovation. And we are exploring the feasibility of both traditional bracing methods as well as the base isolation method.
So the base isolation method has not been eliminated?
No.
And so that's hard to understand from the diagrams? Because my understanding is that base isolation depends on a rather large footprint. And so I got a little confused about that. Are we going to hear more about that as we
Well, it
go into the
require,
alternative?
if we choose that alternative, and it may be a very good one for this building because it does more to preserve the historic fabric of the building, whereas the traditional method is more visible, and also in the event of an earthquake, your brick and stone may, unreinforced masonry may just shatter and fall to the ground, whereas this one stops the forces from reaching the building. So for that reason, it's very attractive. The base isolation method will require an excavation of approximately, I think, 6 feet below the basement level. And each
all around.
footing will be individually treated, so we don't, pull the rug out from under the building all at once. In that same space, we will be able to run our ductwork, our pipes, which we would have to create anyway in order to avoid having the pipes as they are now crowding your view of the beautiful vaulted ceiling.
So for the three alternatives that are being considered, base isolation is still an option that could inform all three?
Yes.
Okay.
We
That's
are
what I didn't get.
required by the building code to upgrade the castle's seismic
Yeah, I got
performance.
that. But the technique of seismic upgrade has yet to be determined in all of the alternatives.
Correct.
Okay, that was a question. Thank you.
And an excellent question. So, Mr. Griffiths, did you have, go ahead, Mr. Gay.
I just had a quick question. First of all, a quick statement that this master plan obviously is addressing, I think, very significant and needed concepts for the reconfiguration of all of this. Clearly, circulation is of utmost design importance with the infrastructure creation. I caught a comment today with the presentation of the EDR that may not be correct, but it seemed to indicate that there was some differing ideas or potential ability to look at the Hirshhorn wall. I know this is not the biggest issue we're talking about, but were there other options? Are there significant thoughts of how that can be utilized? Because I find that also a very limiting factor in terms of the circulation into that area.
Do you want me, I can try to clarify. I'm not sure exactly what I said, but the alternatives do look at variations and changes to the Hirshhorn walls. Alternative D is the most dramatic. It removes a substantial portion of the walls to the north side facing the National Mall, which is reflected in the EDR. We say this is going to have the most impact to the setting of the Hirshhorn Museum. Alternatives B and F are much more limited. It's just that pedestrian entrance,
the small opening with the new
which I
garden.
showed on the screen.
Which is, I think, one of the great moves of this master plan, of the smaller moves of removing that loading area and then actually having that as part of the gardens. But so were there limitations of what could be looked at in terms of removing portions of the Hirshhorn wall?
I mean, through the alternatives, that is what Smithsonian looked at, and I think settled on this idea that a much more minor improvement would still meet their goals,
Right.
Without negatively impacting the Hirshhorn setting.
Okay, thank you.
During the course of the project, we prepared a determination of eligibility for listing the Hirshhorn Museum on the National Register. It is not quite the 50 years that is usually considered, but as a 40-plus, it was deemed significant enough to be eligible. And that analysis changed our view a bit on the preservation approach to the building, and we advised our architects that we did not want to remove the portions of the wall on the north side.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Gals.
Really, my clarification question has to do with the excavation under the castle. And I guess, first, I have a two-part question. So the first question is, in all the alternatives, we are increasing the floor-to-floor height of the basement in the castle.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. And then my second part question is, so in the difference between, say, D and F, is that we are banning, in D, we have the loading also going further down, and in F, we don't have that. So I didn't understand why we do or don't need that option.
The main difference in terms of the basement area of the castle between D and F is that in D, below the public basement level, which we already lowered, was a whole nother level of mechanical and related spaces, non-public space. And at one end, a loading dock that came further under the castle into that sub-basement space. In alternative F, we have taken all of the mechanical out from under the castle and put it in a multi-story building, underground building between the AIB and the African Art Museum of the Quadrangle. And so that enabled us to reduce the excavation under the castle, and it is a better location, our engineers tell us, for the mechanical room. So many benefits.
Thank you.
I don't think it's possible to eliminate Dylan Ripley's presence in his history with the museum. But what's happening with him on the mall with the gardens? Is his presence still going to be acknowledged and recognized?
Absolutely. I
plans?
think the Mary Livingston Ripley Garden will be, his wife, named after his wife, will continue and will be able to be expanded with the removal of the Arts and Industries parking lot and service area that now occurs at the south end of the garden. And of course, we call our education center the Ripley Education Center. That those spaces, we are stakeholders, the Smithsonian Associates who manage our education programs, have ambitions to almost double their current space in terms of their classrooms where they have the adult and education programs and special lectures and whatnot. So that will continue. It will just be reconfigured and in different places in our buildings.
Question? This way?
Can I only ask a question
Well, I mean,
and add my comments, or are we going
I was
to tell
trying
me
to-
what I, okay.
trying to
Well,
be efficient.
I want to go back to some of the questions that Commissioner Wright asked, because I didn't quite understand the answer around the garden and the donor's intent. And I'll do my editorializing later, I guess. But so that it must exist, right? One of the documents really struck me because it was so specific about the garden, and it was completed in '87. The design was not as a new garden, but as a renewal and enhancement of the Victorian garden installed in 1976 in celebration of the nation's centennial. Indeed, records indicate that the Hop Garden was created to respond to a major public outcry over the Smithsonian's announcement that it planned to destroy the garden then on site. So there's a long history, it sounds like, of attention being paid to this garden. So I am very curious. I work with a lot of donors in my day job, and their donor intents are very specific. So I am a little troubled that we don't really know what that donor intent was in terms of the design of the garden. And what I'm hearing from the testimony is it's the lack of commitment to how that garden would be restored. I mean, obviously, first and foremost, I'd love it to be saved and look into new roofing installations as an alternative. You're saying that you've done that, and there isn't one, but in terms of the donor's intent and impact on design, is there a better way to reflect it in terms of that commitment?
We believe that we are honoring our donors' intent in the continued revitalization of the Hab Garden, its expansion, and we are retaining specific elements of the current garden, including the Renwick gates, are shown in alternative F, and we also have shown the parterre in alternative F as well. We have not specifically retained works of art, but we envision a garden of similar horticultural display, appropriate setting for the castle, and the display of art related to the museums that will still be housed in the quadrangle.
But not a recreation of the current design.
No, it is
Which is a
difficult to
Victorian
move the
design.
entry pavilions and also exactly recreate the garden as it is now.
So I have another process question. Why are we approving comments before the end of the public comment period, which is January 16th?
Sure, this is the opportunity for the commission to provide comments to the Smithsonian, along with, and the public comments will also come in, similar to other projects.
So we have to get ours in by the 16th as well, is what you're saying? We couldn't provide it after the 16th.
I think it's helpful at this time because we're in the process, but the commission can certainly.
Right. Oh, I'm just curious about taking more time. I mean, this is a hugely significant cultural landscape, and I'm troubled by the attention that's typically on the architecture of the building. And I know that there's great concern, and I heard the phrase appropriate stewardship to the building. But the testimony from the Committee of 100 and the garden clubs are clearly focused on the cultural landscape. And I think that's what gives me discomfort, that there isn't enough of a commitment specifically to how we work that through. At least that's not what I'm hearing, and it doesn't sound like it's been resolved between the Smithsonian and the parties, and maybe you're working toward that. So that's why I'm just uncomfortable moving this forward until we see a little more resolution. That's
We have
just my
prepared
personal
a
position.
cultural landscape report that has been available in draft form for a year or two, and we will be finalizing that soon to reflect the recent determinations of eligibility for buildings. So we have been doing that research as part of the project.
And you'll continue to work with the garden clubs and Committee of 100 to address these issues?
At this
Can they be
point, that
reconciled?
we're not designing the specific project. However, we are proposing that when the time comes to do the actual projects of the master plan, we will, in addition to our internal steering committee, we would like to develop a task force for the exterior building designs as well as a task force for the landscape and garden designs that will draw on members of the public.
If I may, I think if you feel it's appropriate, you can certainly incorporate those comments in the recommendation today. I mean, I think that would be helpful.
That's just what I was going to ask
That
you
would be
to do.
helpful.
'Cause I think that's really important that we continue to support the continuing conversation and working toward this resolution and answering the questions around the donor intent, because it's a sacred place for many people around the nation. And I just feel a big obligation to make sure we try to get that right and honor everything you're trying to do to make the campus work better. I get that, but it just doesn't seem like we're there to give people assurances. So.
Okay, so unless we have other specific questions for
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make two comments. First of all, often I've used the word cream here, which is a street word for cash rules every action made. And to Mrs. White's point, donors are going to be very significant in the funding of this, I think, in the end, because the government may not have the cash to do it or money to do it. So we got to be very respectful of that direction. That's one point. The second one, and that's what Ms. White, I think, her point, well made. The second issue is Dillon. I happen to have been, first I've been involved with the museum, Smithsonian, in many ways for quite a long time. I've been able to be engaged, not with the mothership necessarily, but with the Anacostia branch. But I think that knowing Dillon, which was what I really got to know him very well, it was a special connection for me. And I know that he would be in favor of anything that was progressive improvement and extending other kinds of things that he would be interested in. So I hope this is a complicated decision we have to make here, but I think we shouldn't be we should be aware of progress and future development. So we look forward rather than be too unnecessarily constrained by historical things. So I think that would be his vision, and I think. So let's hope we can apply that as we go forward.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we'll try to turn things back to the commission for any further discussion or comments. And so I certainly have things to say, but I'm not going to go first this time.
I am, yay. I want to echo Commissioner Dixon's thoughts around looking towards the future, and I think that that's exciting to me. I don't know if you guys are just telling a stifled story, because we have private sector museums like the Museum of the Bible, we have the National African American History Museum, we have the National Gallery, there's so many museums who have told a very forward-thinking narrative about how they need to use space, how they use design, how they're thinking about materials, how they're doing that. And I just sort of read this as like a really basic campus plan to make us be able to walk around a little bit more. And like the story of why we need to do this to be awesome for the next 300 years is a little lost. And I'm sure it's just storytelling, but you guys really need to understand how this museum exists as the mothership within the cultural context of the excellence of the Smithsonian and its multiple museums. Because this should always be the best. And if you have to dig under a little bit and do some stuff a new way and do that to show how that really advances the mission, needs to be very, very clear to me. The other thing in looking forward is a great District of Columbia has grown in ways we never would have thought in the past 50 years. I mean, it's just the wharf alone, we have so many cultural amenities, we've done so much planning. I'm really thank NCPC staff for being responsive, but you guys don't exist in a bubble anymore. And so what does the Southwest Area Plan say? What does the Eco District Plan say? What does our zoning say? There's so much more guidance about how the Smithsonian Castle now is in the middle of a thriving district, that the orientation, I tell you, this is crazy, and I'll be finished quick, Peter, is because I have historic preservation, urban design, and planning, and we can't agree internally ourselves, right? We're noshing on this, but we got hung up on pavilions and on gardens, and didn't really realize there's a crap load of people who are residents of the district who are going to use this and love this space however it ends up being. And if you don't sort of think and respect about how this is the center or the top of a significant portion of the district community, then you're only serving tourists who are coming in from the top. But we've done so much work to invest in the bottom. So we need to have a stronger context on that. And then, and I'm going to be strong about this because I won't say brushed off, it's not the right way to say it. I was not in the space to make the case for the South for the last 4 things that have come up about the South. and I've had my staff work on this. 30 new development, millions of square feet, architectural innovation, cultural innovation. I wrote it down. I'm going to make sure it gets sent to you in the Office of Planning's report, because it's thriving to the south, and I'm really going to push in everything that happens on the south that we recognize that, with strong architecture, strong entrances, and a respect for how it's going to be used more by the residents of the District of Columbia. And then finally, I'll just say is the east-west, I know you guys recognize that from the Hirshhorn to the, what's the pretty building? The Freer? The Freer. Your east-west now is from the Eisenhower Memorial to the African American Museum, all along Independence. And when we walk down there, it's great to see that internal circulation, but what are we thinking about in terms of street-safe guidelines, shading, respite, that you really are going to add to the built environment and character to accommodate our visitors and our residents through both design and that. And then last thing I'll say is you've been sort of, there's been an energy and excitement on behalf of the Hirshhorn to start doing this. And so they're part of your master plan. It looks like they're leading on this with the dots that went on the outside of the wrapper that led into Southwest, that you just, I'm sure it's all there, but it's not, the story is not there. So I'm sorry I had to put that on there, and I just want to let you know that we are going to be putting in a lot of comments to this sort of nature, but want that the commission know that we've been doing a lot of thinking, and I finally feel like I have the meat to say it.
Well, thank you for those energetic comments. Who else would like to speak? That's right. Further comments?
No, I just fell in love. I have nothing further to say. I agree with a lot of what Commissioner Shaw just stated. I think there's a lot that hasn't been addressed yet, and it feels insular, and it needs to be a bubble buster, and to think more broadly. And I will be watching the base isolation issue closely, because I still need a better explanation to understand it.
Did you want to talk more about the AIB too? I mean, you started going into that comment before.
Well, I think I made it, which was simple. I think it's a hard sell it just, the story of what's going to happen to that building feels so amorphous. And I don't know, wasn't it $10 million that's already been spent on it? Right?
Much more than that.
Yeah, a big chunk of change, and for that much money, and with a budget horizon that feels more depressing by the moment, it feels, that to me is not a reason to delay deciding. It's a reason to escalate decision making, because you have to have a clear vision and a clear mission so that you can compete for limited resources. And with a vague story of temporary exhibitions and an education center, it feels vague. And I don't understand that, because the building's been, that money was spent a long time ago. And I don't know that if I, as a taxpayer, I would feel like I got my money's worth for it without finishing it off and allowing this glorious building to have a second comeback that it deserves. So I would urge the Smithsonian to use, as I did last time, the master plan as leverage to pressing for a decision to be made. It just seems like it's been undecided for a long time.
Thank you. Mr. Gallo.
Well, I'm not going to be as eloquent as you two, and so it's humbling to follow you, actually. But I do think that a little bit of today, at least, it's been about a roof versus a garden. And I know it's much more than that, of course, and I think thank you for acknowledging that. And I think what we're hearing today is, can it be a roof and a garden? Can it be both? Can it be a holistic notion, at least as it relates to that topic? And hopefully that message is coming through in the way the communication needs to go forward to arrive at a direction and a solution, and I'm all for that. My bigger kind of question has to do with this connectivity, this visual connectivity to the mall and from the mall into the garden. I haven't been a big fan of the current Ripley Pavilion. I feel only in the sense that I feel it's a blocker to the garden, and it, as much as this is a cultural landscape, I still think it's somewhat secret for a lot of the visitors of Washington who don't know it's there. And so, in that sense, and I'm very interested in enhancements to that visual openness and connectivity, and excited about that. The same is true with the 10th Street potential long-term planning connection, and that's exciting to think about. And frankly, opening the garden further by removing these pavilions is something that's interesting to me. I think, I think maybe these pavilions were there to signal that there are things going on below grade. Hey, come here, come find. But I don't feel those pavilions necessarily draw you in. They're not the kind of attraction that says, please come to these other beautiful museums with incredible collections to visit. And then I guess my last point about the connectivity, though, is that from all the visuals, and the one that's got the alternative F with the cherry blossom trees, and you can't really see what you're envisioning with these new pavilions, that you're proposing. Yeah, I mean, what is that? I don't know. And then there was another one on an east-west axis that I still don't know. I know you don't know either, but all I would say, my comment is that the visual connection needs to be improved if you're making that case, and I'm not convinced that the kind of skateboard ramp thing is there yet. Maybe it'll work if it's transparent or something, but locating those pavilions at that opportunity for connection to draw you into the space, and from the space to draw you to the mall, is going to be a very tender design solution, and we're going to be watching that very, very carefully. And then I have one last comment, which has to do with Hirshhorn and the kind of connection there. I found that lovely secret Ripley Garden coming to the tour. I had never been in it before, and it is amazing. I mean, you have to go if you haven't seen it. It's really, and I believe it is a secret. It's clear that the design of Hirshhorn was to wall itself off from its neighbors. I can't speak to whether that design intent should be honored in so purely as to continue to keep the wall from being penetrated, but I think there's a very strong case for opening it up in a respectful way, and I think the alternative F is suggesting that, and I think it would benefit whatever happens to arts and industry. I think it's going to benefit that beautiful Ripley Garden that maybe is going to be expanded, it sounds like, and I think it would benefit the Hirshhorn as well. So, thank you.
Other comments? All right. I have a few. So I appreciate everything that's been said so far. I absolutely can appreciate the energy and enthusiasm that Commissioner Shaw brought in his comments, and I think that is part of what's missing. And, you know, the master plans are not inherently exciting and sexy, right? There's a lot of, you know, box checking things that you have to do. So, and I was really taken by the fact that when Mr. Horvath gave the sort of reiterated the reasons for this, and I thought, okay, we're going to get the top 4 or 5, and then I wrote them all down, and I kind of lost track at about 13 purposes for this. And I understand that's sort of normal master planning, and you know, we're one of the biggest offenders in that department. Our master plans are laundry lists of things that need to be done. So I appreciate the idea that there is a bigger vision, and that needs to be articulated a little bit better. I would say that the things that I have to say at this point are focused more generally on Park Service and Department of Interior concerns, as opposed to the specific concerns of the Park Service as the immediate neighbor on the mall. Fortunately, things like the realignment of Jefferson Drive are no longer in the plan, because that was a big concern of ours on a very practical level. But we will, and we also, I think, want to emphasize that we're looking at this master plan and eventual approval process as a more of a programmatic environmental impact statement rather than something that's going to enable specific actions, right? So there'll be separate NEPA compliance that we will participate in, because there's nothing in here that is going to indicate a decision for us. If the Jefferson Drive realignment had been in there, that might have been the case, in which case we would have dug in deeper on the specifics of what we would need in order to make a decision. That's, again, speaking for the Park Service. Now on to some of the other specific concerns that we have with regard to the overall strategy of the relocation of the pavilions and the new entrance and so on that's described in alternative F. I think one of the concerns that's missing in the comments is the potential for relocated pavilions to actually substantially alter the setting for the castle when viewed from the south. And I would actually, I'm thinking that we might actually want to add a finding related to that, because again, that's a concern of ours. I don't know at this point, again, because we haven't gotten far into actual design, to understand how problematic that might be. I mean, certainly the idea of having smaller pavilions in that overall quadrangle space makes a lot of sense. And certainly having more welcoming pavilions, as Mr. Gallus points out, the current ones are, a little heavy, and it's a little hard to find the doors. And so I think a more inviting entrance is certainly a welcome thing, and having, as I said, smaller ones. And I understand the utility of having them relocated and more visible from the mall. One of the things that we struggle with is that we don't necessarily understand how this truly does improve visibility from the mall. In removing the Ripley Pavilion, that entrance point, that is a big blockage. So taking that away makes a whole lot of sense, and that means that, yes, immediately you can see into the garden. But what we see so far is an entrance point, but not necessarily the garden itself. And so I don't know that we're creating the right kind of entry at that point. We also don't know, since we only have seen views from in front of the Freer, we don't really know how much more visible this might be to people on the mall. So I think these are things that we need to look at more carefully. And of course, we have to look at it from the other side, and that pinch point between Arts and Industries and the castle is much tighter. So these are things that I think we will have to look at more carefully going forward. I'm not suggesting all of these things are things that should be written into the commission action. I think the concern about the setting of the castle is something we should consider writing in. The rest of these are things that I think that we will be sharing in our specific comments, because the Park Service will write that's to probably come from the Department of the Interior, but we will write a letter in response to that. I think that I've hit a lot of the issues with regard to the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. I think we are very interested in the additional details that the Commission is requesting for a number of reasons. Certainly, we want to make sure that that's that the Smithsonian is able to fully take advantage of that space. We also don't want it to be a conflicting presence on the mall. And if we make the Sculpture Garden too shallow, does it become, does that adversely affect the setting of the mall? Those are the sorts of questions that we have. We also have some concerns about construction activities in those areas and the things that could be happening along the drive, and the potential to affect the elm trees. But again, those are things that I think will get figured out later on, and not items that we would want to raise within the context of the EDR. I think the last thing I would say is that we are still discussing this internally, and I don't know whether or not we will indicate a preference among the alternatives. But at this point, if we were to indicate a preference, most likely it would be for alternative B, because it is a little bit more conservative and a little bit addresses better the issues of the setting of the castle. And again, this is driven largely by our concerns about the NHL as opposed to specific concerns that the Park Service might have, being an adjacent property manager. So I think that B does a better job of giving deference to the castle. I think it also has the additional benefit of giving greater deference to the garden as it has been designed, and as we hear from the public very strongly about preserving that garden. And so I think that, there are other reasons that are kind of external to our principal interests that would support that same conclusion. That being said, we understand that B doesn't hit all the marks or may not hit all the marks for the Smithsonian, and might need to be altered. Similarly, alternative F might be altered and be made more like alternative B. And so there could be some further massaging of the alternatives that get it to a place where I think more people can line up behind it. So those are my thoughts. And I do have some language that I would like to suggest that we add to the EDR. Maybe, Ms. White, you talked about possibly adding some language as well, so we can talk about that.
Your comments reassuring.
Okay, so with my finding is this, or what I'm suggesting is that the Commission finds that the relocated pavilions and addition of large-scale ramps to the lower level could alter the setting of the castle and the Arts and Industries buildings, and could have undesirable effects on these two National Historic Landmarks. Now, that's a quickie. I think that we probably need to specify that it would be the addition of, the relocated pavilions and addition of large-scale ramps to the lower level. I mean, I guess it would have to be specifically on the comments regarding alternative, regarding the quadrangle?
I was going to.
Yeah, or do we have to specify as it being specific?
You can say alternative F or alternative D, or both, I mean, if you think.
Okay, so just within the quadrangle section.
I was going to say, on page 4, you could add that regarding the quadrangle building and pavilions. After the third finds, I maybe add it there.
Yeah. Well, it's.
It counterbalances the one above it, right?
I mean, I think it counterbalances the final fines.
Okay, or we could say it.
So it may be at the very end of that. So that would be my suggestion. should I read it again? Or should I need to make a motion to amend the EDR?
Please do that, and it sounds like you might have a version at hand, which would be usefully speak from.
Right, okay. So, but I can make the motion. I'm not usually wearing both hats here, so. I would move that we amend the EDR to add the following language in the section regarding quadrangle building and pavilions, to say, finds that relocated pavilions and addition of large-scale ramps to a lower level could alter the setting of the castle and the Arts and Industries building and could have undesirable effects on these two National Historic Landmarks. So that's what I would suggest. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on that? Yeah.
Yeah, when you say could have adverse effects, is there a way to say may? In other words?
Well, yeah, I mean, I used could because I was picking up on the way a number of the other findings were phrased.
Mm-hmm.
May have would be perfectly fine. And again, I didn't use the word adverse effects. I used undesirable.
Trying to make it stronger
Adverse-
or weaker?
Yeah.
No, I'm trying to make it neutral.
Yeah, I
No.
agree. I mean,
Yeah.
we could say could not have any impact.
May impact. In other words, it may not say adverse. Maybe it's,
No, and I did not use the word adverse very specifically because adverse has meaning
okay.
in the Section 106 context that I did not want to imply. I think may have undesirable effects.
So,
It may not, but I think the point is to caution that it may.
Just a quick comment, because I think you're saying what I'm also thinking is, I'm not so sure I'm aligned with that statement. And having Mr. May come in and say, the Park Service is going to be weighing in, and this is our opinion, why don't we amend our EDR? I think there's an opportunity of which the Park Service can make that. I didn't hear any of that discussion today, and I'm not in support of that in terms of changing the language. I think in terms of the master plan as it's presented, it is obviously open for great comment. That's the process of which we are in. Right. And I think those kind of comments, but I feel that that statement has great weight in terms of our own report, and I'm not so sure. I actually thought it was an intriguing idea to maybe go below grade in front of the castle so that you don't impede that and minimize those pavilions and locate them up closer. Again, I think this is getting into a lot of detail that needs to be really deliberately focused on and developed.
So, in other words, Mr. May, I think that I was reacting to a suggestion that it may have negative, right? And what if you were to say may have impacts?
But don't we know that? Doesn't anything?
Certainly, but I'm not certain that negative. I'm not confident of it. Suggests a sort of direction that I'm not. I don't feel qualified to vote on.
So let me just say that the Park Service intends to comment on this, and I expect that our comments will be much more direct and much more specific because there are folks on our side who are very, very concerned that it absolutely will have an effect, and what's been proposed from their perspective really does damage to the setting of the castle. So they feel very strongly that this very well could be an adverse effect. And again, in the context of Section 106, that's a very significant thing. So this is what I'm trying to do is simply say that in addition to the fact that we may get beneficial impact from relocating the pavilions, making them smaller, moving them away from Independence Avenue, that actually could have an effect on the castle and the Arts and Industries building. And that's really all I'm trying to say in the context of NCPC, not because we're trying to, throw cold water on this, on a concept that's worth exploring. It's really just, be careful.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I would like to, seems that you're going to be able to comment on this as through your agency's submission. Maybe this is a heads up for us that you feel that way, or your agency seems to feel that way, but maybe it doesn't need to be part of our document now.
And I think it's good that we have a heads up. I mean, you've shared it very well, but to have it put in may not be the right approach to it at this point.
It's, yeah, I mean, but it could be the right way, yes.
Well, I want to give a heads up too that this is coming from our historic preservation. I mean, so I told you I didn't want to talk about pavilions that much, but I think that this recommendation just gives also a thread or something to the NCPC staff and to them to make sure that they chew on that a lot more. Because let me tell you, I think we're going to get from all the folks who are here and then from all the agencies when it comes up, I'm going to actually be looking to them to help us reconcile it, or at least say in the end, the commission knew this was coming. We knew we got to chew on it. We made chew on it ahead of time. But that's sort of the space right now because it is coming up like, oh, yeah, you know, pavilions, no pavilions, this or not this, you know, like, and so I think it does lay out some breadcrumbs for us to sort of follow in terms of doing some additional analysis. So I would support it in that space.
This kind of goes back to my question of, do we have to do this today? I'm really perplexed by that. Is it, I mean, what is the urgency of us?
I can offer an opinion on this. I mean, again, because this has to do with our experience with environmental impact statements, that we always time it so that the commission gets to review and provide comments during the official comment period on the draft EIS. It's important to hear from this commission in the same way that the Smithsonian hears from NPS and from, you know, all the other outside groups and other agencies who are potentially affected by this. I mean, we all get referrals within the government system to review these things, and many agencies decline to comment, but, you know, we get a lot of these things, we have to review them, and it's, you know, we get them in during that official comment period, and it's simply part of the process. I think that the question of whether we pick an alternative at the review in March or April, whenever it is, that's a different question. I mean, we may not be ready to say.
We will have been informed by all
yes.
of the I was just trying to get to the
prepared.
discomfort of adding or amending the EDR today, as opposed to having that heads up. That's something we need to keep looking at. I think that was what I was trying to reconcile
Here was
for
correct.
myself.
I think the issue here is the commission obviously has some comments about the EIS alternatives that are being presented. This, as Mr. Shaw said, it actually lays out a series of markers in terms of what are important issues to the commission to consider when you review the draft master plan when it comes. And that, you know, you'll have a shot at the draft master plan and at the final master plan that will be submitted towards the end of the year. So you're laying out issues that are important to you, that you want to see resolved through the draft and subsequently through the final master plan. And then the actual design of projects, such as what will the garden look like, and will be coming in when they're ready to, when they prepare for construction or when they get closer to construction. So use the master plan as a basis to review, you know, whether this fits the, you know, the garden scheme or more of a park scheme. Does it respect, you know, the various elements that the commission feels important, which are stated in the master plan? So this is the beginning of that process, but I do feel it's important for the commission to at least lay out what's important to them early on, so the applicant has some clear guidance in the future and not be surprised later on when, you know, something is rejected or not liked by the commission as a whole. So that's really what the purpose of this is.
And I'd just like to also reiterate, just to explain the process part, I mean, the Section 106 process is going on as well. And that programmatic agreement that I mentioned is also incredibly important in laying out how these projects are going to be developed over time. And we have several master plans from many agencies where we go through that review as well. So to add more complexity to this, that's also something that's going to have to be advanced too. So.
I'm in favor of the breadcrumb trail too as well, because things happen and we need to set a marker down on what matters to us. Things happen, you know, in my 8 years at GSA, we've had 2 master plans that have been paused, for lack of another word, and with no certainty as to when they will be started up again. So relying on people's memory and is probably not a good idea, especially in an enterprise that's going to take as long as this one. Not the formulation of the plan, but the implementation. And let's hope that it progresses apace. But if it doesn't, we need to leave a record. So I support your amendment, Mr. May.
Do we have any further discussion? Is there further discussion? Yeah.
Clarification question.
Yeah.
So the word negative is what I'm reacting to. Can anybody comment on the need for that word?
So the word I used was undesirable. It was not negative.
Oh, okay. So could you read that phrase?
Sure, I'll read the whole thing from the beginning, since it's been a while. As we do this, I'm going to tweak the word could to may, but finds that the relocated pavilions and addition of large-scale ramps to a lower level could alter the setting of the castle and the Arts and Industries building and may have undesirable effects on these two National Historic Landmarks. I did try to make it a light touch, but just to mark it. So do we have any further discussion or comments? Then I would ask that for all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Opposed.
So we have 7 in favor and 1 opposed. And so the motion carries to amend the EDR. And now we'd look for a motion on the EDR unless there's further discussion. That's right.
I defer to Ms. White. I thought she had language about the donor relationship that I think is important to also mark.
I don't know that I wrote anything down from what I said, but when you said add the language, I was trying to go back to page 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Recommends the design of the future garden balance the desire, that line. And the only thing I could come up with was to maintain its prominence as a historical cultural landscape. I don't know if we want to say in respect of the donor agreement, but I was just trying to insert the sensitivity around the cultural landscape of the garden. I don't know if that's helpful.
There might actually be 2 thoughts here.
Yeah.
One is the importance of the cultural landscape, and the second one is we're not clear yet what is
more of a
what's in the
question around
donor's
the
agreement.
donor.
So what I might suggest is that at the time the Smithsonian submits their master plan, draft master plan, that at least we have a clearer answer to that. And I think that, because that's just a question, and I don't think anybody here is prepared to answer that. But if they do more research, they may have a more definitive answer with respect to the donor's wishes.
Yeah, because I wasn't prepared on that one. But I maintain its prominence as a historical cultural landscape. If maintain, is that too strong? It's on page 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph. Recommends the design of the future garden balance the desire to maintain, and then I would insert its prominence as a historic cultural landscape, comma, and then the rest would stay the same. And again, it's just a marker that the Smithsonian continue to work with the folks who are concerned about the prominence of the garden, and that be respected.
Yeah, that's fine with me. I don't want to press in the EDR specifically to be a little bit more reassured that the donor's wishes are being honored, but I'd like to have a more
No, but they can bring whatever.
complete conversation about it in the future.
Right. So I do have a question about the use of the terminology cultural landscape in this context, and whether that's a concern, because again, that's something that has specific meaning. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we would recommend something else that's a little more generic to this site? I mean, what are what is it about this that's important?
Right.
Because cultural landscape and historic have specific meanings.
Right.
So what would you recommend?
Could you say it's historic and cultural?
Yeah.
Just nothing.
But they, I'm sorry, Ms. Trowbridge said that they've done a study on the cultural sort of landscape, if are the cultural.
It is a historic cultural landscape, in my opinion. So, I mean, to me, that's just a fact. But I hear you, Peter, that there are ways that people define it. But I think there's general agreement among all the parties. That's a very important spot. That's why we're having such a debate about it. So I'm just saying that the prominence is what needs to be at the forefront of the consideration of the redesign, not necessarily that it's an intimate character and scale. And I mean, it is historic. It's what the decision was made when it was first done, to be compatible with the Victorian nature of the building. So that's what I was trying to get across.
Original intent and.
But you have to be careful, it's really quick, I'm sorry, is because the
It's like
pavilions.
you wouldn't change the landmark building. I
Right.
mean, it's not a designated landmark garden, but I'm just saying it should be treated with the same level of care and concern as the building is. That landscape needs to be considered in that way.
We want to make
That's
sure
what I'm
that
trying to achieve. I don't know quite how to say it.
our HP staff, this gets deep into the weeds now, is that, the idea that pavilions and the garden are linked in some people's
Yeah,
eyes.
and I'm not even speaking to the
And in the district of
pavilions.
that, but that's what I'm trying to make sure that
Yeah.
even for this garden, it puts the flag up for us that we're still trying to reconcile, because the DC Historic District is the garden and the pavilions.
Gotcha.
And so,
Well, this
and we're
just
trying to
says
reconcile.
future garden. This was the only statement I saw that made sense.
I know the reconciliation that came from some of the conversations they had with our staff was that the buildings themselves, yes, were something we're still going back and forth on, but it framed an intimate space. So how to maintain that? So when we switch the cultural landscape, I'm saying with historic, I'm concerned that when our staff tries to reconcile this, that internally my staff's going to go back and forth where we consider the pavilions or the roof or the finials or just something goes in there. So that if we can figure out some way with the language to.
Or its historic prominence. I mean, some reference, but it is an important distinction.
What if we simply were to try to insert the word prominence in addition? I
think that's what we were.
Because right now you have a space of intimate character and scale, so that describes kind of what it's like. But I think that a statement more about its importance, its prominence would be helpful, so.
Mr. May, I would suggest using, there it is. The design scale of the future garden balance the desire to maintain a space of intimate character and scale commensurate with its importance and prominence.
It's better. But I don't know why we're being so weak about it, but I could live with that.
Again, it's, we have, as good bureaucrats, we have a certain sensitivities to particular words.
As the member at
right?
large, I don't have to worry about it.
I understand that.
So that's
I
why I'm
appreciate
pushing
it.
the envelope.
Sometimes I try to speak in.
And having been a bureaucrat, I get it. So I think the secretary's compromise makes me comfortable. I think the message has been really clear, but your language is good.
Okay. And
So would you like to make a motion to adopt that?
Do you want to read it again so everybody?
certainly. Recommends the design of the future garden balance the desire to maintain a space of intimate character and scale commensurate with its importance and prominence, with the need to improve the quadrangle building and desire for greater access and visibility across the campus.
That works for me. So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Just if I may note, did you also want to include in the motion anything about the donor intent? And it was more as a request to provide more definitive information?
I think that was, it boiled down to a request for more information for the next time around.
I don't think that needs to be in the EDR. does it?
Right.
Doesn't have to.
Okay. I think we're all on agree with that. Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
So we have a motion on the floor to amend the EDR. with the language that Ms. Coster just read. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No opposed, passed unanimously. Motion made by Ms. White, and I'm sorry I missed who seconded, but
Eric.
Eric. Mr. Shaw, thank you. Okay, so now we are up for I'm looking for a motion to approve. I apologize, I'm not used to pushing that button that often.
So moved.
So moved, we have a motion.
EDR is amended.
Is there a second on the motion to move the EDR as amended? And we have the second from Mr. Gallus. So all those in favor of the amended EDR, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And again, it passes I'm sorry, all opposed? No opposed? Passes unanimously. So the amended EDR is done. Thank you, Preston Bryant. For taking the day off. Business does not end there. We have a couple more items on the agenda. So the next item on the agenda is item number 5B, approval of comments on the draft master plan for Joint Base Andrews submitted by the Air Force. Mr. Weil?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The Air Force has submitted a draft master plan for Joint Base Andrews, which is located in central Prince George's County, Maryland, just outside the Beltway. The last time NCPC reviewed a master plan for the installation was back in 1990. Joint Base Andrews is approximately 4,400 acres, bordered by Allentown Road on the west, Route 4 on the east, and Suitland Parkway to the north. The installation has a daytime worker population of 17,000 people, a residential population of 2,600, and is home to various missions from the Department of Defense, Maryland National Guard, Maryland State Police, and District National Guard. The installation master plan is founded on a strategic vision which aligns the larger various Department of Defense missions and national defense strategy. The vision, which is shown before you, speaks to the installation's preeminent role in our nation's military. From this vision, the plan has 5 primary goals, which are to modernize and maintain the installation's flight support capability, to effectively plan in conjunction with off-base development, to promote sustainable development and practices, and to promote the health, safety, and quality of life for Joint Base Andrews workers and residents. Each of the goals is supported by a number of more specific objectives, several of which are designed to minimize the installation's impact to the natural environment and to develop the installation in a more efficient manner. Here is a satellite of the installation, and for context, here are the projects that we reviewed at last month's meeting: the new hangar complex and building relocation. And the month before that, in November, we reviewed the Consolidated Communications Center project, which is located in the northwestern portion of the installation. The 2016 Joint Base Andrews Master Plan, which is technically known as an Installation Development Plan, is a planning framework for the base over the next 20 to 30 years. The plan inventories existing infrastructure, assesses base assets, and compiles numerous recommendations on how to develop the installation to meet its future development goals. With no assumed new population or mission growth on the installation at this time, the 2016 plan was developed as a recapitalization plan, identifying future short, medium, and long-term projects that will maintain installation operations through various improvement and recapitalization projects. The master plan is designed to guide future development in conjunction with the 2009 Architectural Compatibility Plan, which includes more detailed information on roadway hierarchy, roadway cross-sections, street furniture, landscaping, lighting, and building design. The installation master plan is based on branch-wide Air Force planning policies, formerly known as Air Force Instruction for Comprehensive Planning, which are intended to improve and integrate physical development with the investment planning process, legal requirements, and other DoD and Air Force policies. In the 2012 Department of Defense Unified Facilities Criteria for Installation Master Planning resource, serves as the foundational, sustainability-oriented policy for all Department of Defense master plans within the continental United States. Their intent is to promote efficient use of military resources through compact, mixed-use, multimodal development. Building on the Installation Development Plan are smaller-scale area development plans, which are intended to bridge the gap between the installation-wide plan and site-specific project plans through planning regulations that are specific to a particular area of focus on the base. ADPs are prescribed in both the UFC and Air Force instructions for planning. The Joint Base Andrews IDP identifies several future area development plans to regulate the more dynamic locations on the base with information on roadways, pedestrian paths, parking, and landscaping. This slide shows an example of an area development plan that was developed for a new town center from a previous installation master plan. And then lastly, as projects are identified, developed, and funded, project plans guide site-specific design and construction. In particular, these plans are all integral to base planning since they translate broader level Department of Defense and Air Force policies into future physical desired systems on the installation for things like transportation, stormwater management, open space, and energy production. Future projects are then designed to fit within these installation-wide systems like pieces in a puzzle to build towards various planning and development goals. Here's a graphic that shows the current installation layout. As you will note, there are 6 gates for access. And here you see the installation's 9 planning districts, each based on framework plan elements, relationships to the existing transportation network, and established land use patterns. The most predominant of the districts, the airfield district, bifurcates the installation with 2 main north-south runways and a series of smaller taxiways that connect to each of the 2 operations districts, which host aircraft hangars, warehousing, a control tower, and other various support buildings. The industrial district is situated in the very eastern side of the installation, encompassing uses like vehicle maintenance, repair services, warehousing, and National Guard support buildings. A 130-acre forested area is reserved for various field training purposes in the far northeastern portion of the installation. And the installation's 1 historic district is situated in the northwest, with 3 historic buildings known as the Bell Chance Complex, along with surrounding fields, wetlands, and forested areas. A relatively expansive recreation district resides in the southern part of the installation, encompassing 3 golf courses, several parks, a child daycare center, and a family counseling center. The privatized residential district is located along the southwest side of the installation with approximately 900 military housing units and an elementary school. And the most diverse and dynamic of the planning districts is the administrative and support district in the northwest part of the installation, encompassing uses such as the main headquarters building, temporary housing, a large ambulatory care complex, a fitness center, and a conference center. This district contains approximately half of all potential future developable area on the installation as identified by the master plan. This graphic shows the many planned short-term projects on the installation over the next 5 years, with everything from roof replacements, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system replacements, building consolidations, and pavement repair. And here I've highlighted the more significant short-term projects, which are primarily new buildings, some of which are consolidations of existing missions into new shared buildings rather than reconstructing each building separately. These are the projects that are identified for the medium term, 6 to 10 years into the future. And again, here are the more significant recapitalization projects, which as you can see are largely concentrated in the main administrative and support district. Finally, here are the longer term projects, which are currently scheduled for 11 plus years into the future. And here again, you will notice that some of these projects are concentrated in the installation's administrative and support district. Here we have a close-up view of the district with its 2 access gates, existing development, which is shown in pink, and future development sites, which are shaded in green. Here's the site of the new Consolidated Communications Center. And here again are the more significant projects planned for the district in the future. The installation development plan mentions 3 areas, potential areas where the Air Force would like to develop more detailed area development plans. And one of these, which is shaded here in yellow, would be the site of a new town center development adjacent to the current commissary and base exchange buildings. This is a different location than the town center ADP from 2010 that was developed from a previous master plan, which I displayed in one of my earlier slides. So as you can see from this graphic, this district will be a recipient of a lot of planning activity in the future. So that leads us into our staff analysis, which was based on NCPC submission guidelines along with direction from DoD and Air Force planning policies. Based on the Joint Base Andrews submission, we have determined that additional information is required to enable NCPC to review future projects both at the installation and sub-area levels. Although the 2016 IDP and 2009 Architectural Compatibility Plan adequately describe existing development, infrastructure, and goals and recommendations for the installation, the plans do not go far enough for our review purposes in laying out the installation's future physical, transportation, stormwater management, and landscape networks based on the recent goals and recommendations as expressed through the 2016 Installation Development Plan. And here is the higher level information that we are looking for in the next master plan submission. I do want to point out that the 2009 Architectural Compatibility Plan does have some of this information. However, the information should be updated to reflect the goals and recommendations from the 2016 plan. Both the installation-wide and smaller area information on how the installation will develop in the future is necessary to help the Commission truly understand the larger planning context for each project and to demonstrate how each project will build toward attaining various Air Force and DoD efficiency goals. Here are some examples of future planned installation-wide roadway, pedestrian, and bicycle networks from the 2012 UFC Planning Resource for reference. And here are some examples from a recent master plan that NCPC reviewed last year in January from Fort Belvoir, a multimodal circulation plan you can see on the left, and there's a watershed improvement plan which is displayed on the right. And these plans are great examples of the type of systemic approach that we would like to see for all federal master plans to demonstrate how federal properties will develop in a more efficient, cost-effective, and sustainable way. As I mentioned previously, here are several area development plans for Joint Base Andrews from a previous master plan, and these should be updated as necessary to reflect the current goals and recommendations from the 2016 plan, especially for the areas that are identified in the administrative and support district, which is with its planned concentration of future projects. So with that, here's the Executive Director's recommendation to note that in accordance with DoD and Air Force planning policies that the Air Force has developed an installation development plan for Joint Base Andrews, to note that the plan is a framework plan that includes a vision, goals, and objectives in addition to a list of recommendations and desired capital projects, and also that Joint Base Andrews does not anticipate a population change in the future at this time. To support the vision, goals, and objectives from the IDP to create a more sustainable, efficient operation at Joint Base Andrews. However, to find that additional information is necessary for NCPC's future review of individual site and building projects and their potential for on- and off-site impacts prior to future project submissions. To request that the Air Force include the following information with its next IDP submission to provide the Commission with a broader context of future installation development. First, an installation-wide multimodal circulation plan with existing and planned networks and future improvements, an up-to-date transportation plan with things like parking utilization, planned travel demand management improvements, and goals and implementation schedules for reducing single-occupant vehicle travel. And lastly, installation-wide plans for future stormwater infrastructure, wetlands mitigation, and future renewable energy production locations. So again, the purpose of all this information here that we're requesting is to help us understand all of these future installation-wide pieces and how they will fit together to create a more efficient, secure, and sustainable operation. In this slide, we're requesting updated area development plans that relate to each new project with the following information: a street and block plan with potential development sites, up-to-date street cross-sections, bus transit stops, and bicycle and pedestrian facility improvements, current and future parking facilities to help identify shared parking opportunities, and a more recent landscape plan that reflects installation stormwater management goals and NCPC policies related to trees and vegetation. And lastly, to recommend that the Air Force prioritize completion of the area development plans that are identified for the administrative and support district in light of the number of planned capital projects here. So that now concludes my presentation, and I would like to point out that we have one representative here from the Air Force who is available for any more technical questions regarding the submission. We have David Humphreys, who is a community planner at Joint Base Andrews. Unfortunately, Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Mabbitt, who was supposed to be here, was called away on snow duty, so she is not here today. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weil. Do we have any questions for Mr. Weil on the presentation? Yeah.
Was there any identification of future security concerns or perimeter concerns? I feel like we've been getting a lot of perimeter plans lately that, stormwater's nice, but also, have them anticipate some future security needs or upgrades.
Not that I can recall. Okay. I'm sure there are some in there. There, as you saw, there were probably about 200 projects listed. Okay. The only thing I can recall is at some point there is a gate improvement project or two in that list, but I don't know if David can think of any others.
Thank you. There's actually an intersection between perimeter security and stormwater because we're on a plateau, so we have 7 streams that leave the base in different directions, and each one of those outfalls has to be treated in a secure manner. So even though it's labeled as a stormwater project, a number of those stormwater projects actually have security aspects to them at the outfalls.
Can I make a comment too, or are we still in questions?
Well, other questions for Mr. Weil or Mr. Humphreys? No? Please go ahead.
I don't think we need to amend the EDR, but there's conversations that we can have with them. I like to get ahead of it right now, and there's a lot of direction we've been developing on historic assets and natural assets, and now you're saying stormwater. If there's some way that, I know they're doing a larger framework, but this is so big for a military base that if there's some guidance on where they think they want to go, that we encourage them to do that in some way, or at least to tee it up that, that's just as important as some of this is there. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to move to amend it because we've been amending stuff today, but it would be helpful in those conversations to at least have this stormwater piece, because we've been looking over, is it a fence or a view, or is it water, or is it a setback, or is it lights? We've been understanding how to secure the natural environment in their past 6 or 7 ones we've seen, so just put that in your mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I do know that, and maybe David can speak more on this, that there is a kind of a historic resource asset system that I think most military bases are required to keep. I think it's called the ICRIMP or something. Yeah. So they have real-time kind of, I think, feedback when they're, laying out projects and developing projects, and I think that's supposed to alert for any potential, impacts to historic resources.
That's correct. There's 2 plans. One's for cultural, archaeological, and then one's for natural resources. And those are generally updated every 5 years. There's mention of it in the IDP. I think going forward, what we're going to be doing is probably carrying a better description in the appendices to the IDP. The IDP is an Air Force template, and I think we've gone about as far as we could go with that template, and we're working with Headquarters Air Force to see how we can tweak those to add these kinds of things, because we do have some unique environmental things that we need to accommodate. There is one appendix that's in the installation development plan related to environmental restoration, and it carries all of the land use controls that are required for that. So I think going forward, what you're going to see is there is a wetlands mitigation plan. They're negotiating the final aspects of that right now because we've recognized that. We're working on our Maryland MS4 permit for stormwater. So I think what we'll be doing is providing that additional detail in a set of appendices, since the template doesn't really serve us well in this regard.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Humphreys. Thank you, Mr. Weil, for your insight. Thank you, Mr. Shaw, for raising the issue, and thank you especially for Mr. Shaw for not amending the EDR. Do we have any other discussion?
May.
Sensing no further discussion.
Motion to approve the EDR.
I hear a motion to approve. Is there a second? Second. Motion is seconded. Motion, let's see, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. Motion made by Mr. Shaw and seconded by Ms. White and unanimously carried. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Rose. I apologize.
It's fine.
I'm glad you're keeping track. Why is it in my script to call it out if you really know? All right, next item on the agenda is number 6A. Next item on the agenda is number 6A, an information presentation on the Global City Teams Challenge and our work on PA 2040, 2040, Pennsylvania Avenue, west of the White House.
So, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Today I'm going to deliver an information presentation on the Global Cities Teams Challenge, the GCTC. This is a smart city initiative being led by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I'll tell you a little bit about how NCPC has been involved through a smart city project named PA 2040. But first, the Global Cities Teams Challenge is now a 4-year-long challenge designed to help communities around the world work together to address issues ranging from air quality and transportation management to city services and the visitor experience using smart city solutions. So what is a smart city? The concept of a smart city is somewhat amorphous, but it's really just using digital technology to improve a community's life. And so basically you can use smart infrastructure to engage and connect citizens with an overlay of good planning. The overall goal is to collect urban data from everything, analyze it, and then use that information to make a city work better. So data about everything, it sounds a little bit vague. So more precisely, we mean when we mean by everything is anything in the environment that can change. We've listed a few items in this image that can change, be tracked, and then analyzed to give you an idea of what the range of a smart city project can include. Now, there are several elements that are common in the smart city development process, like collaborative problem solving, virtual design and planning, smart object modeling, data analytics, digital sensors, and cloud computing. NCPC's worked on several projects over the last few years that led to our involvement with the Global Cities Team Challenge. And these 3 projects use some combination of the elements I just mentioned to reach their goals of crowdsourcing an urban design solution, or creating a district-wide energy model, or developing a virtual viewshed augmented reality tool. Lessons learned from these projects led to a greater merger of planning and technology in the PA 2040 Grand Urban Boulevard project that kicked off in October of 2014. And so the project's located, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, try that. The project's located along 17th Street, just adjacent to the White House, on the west end of Pennsylvania Avenue, from 17th Street in the east to 20th Street in the west, I Street to the north, and G Street to the south. The Pennsylvania Avenue project is one of 100 or more projects that were generated by the Global City Team Challenge. The GCTC was developed by an engineer and presidential innovation fellow at NIST, Saku Ri, and the GCTC itself had grown out of the Smart America Challenge. This was an initiative that sought to improve the overall economic climate in the country through innovation, and it did this by creating innovation teams that connected private organizations with government and institutions to develop products, tools, and jobs to kickstart the economy. Smart America 2 was the Global City Teams Challenge, and it had similar goals, but the approach was to set universal Internet of Things, or IoT, standards for smart cities and advance the incubation and deployment of smart cities technology. Now, creating all these smart cities projects requires some funding, and so a funding stream was created by the National Science Foundation through grants and US Ignite. US Ignite is a nonprofit organization that helps to accelerate next generation applications and services for smart communities. They help to facilitate public-private partnerships and secure grants for pilot projects like our PA 2040 project. The last element of the collaboration, the last element of the project is collaboration. And so our original team started off with 3 partners, the DC Office of the Chief Technology Officer, Octo, who provided a lot of leadership and 100% of the funding, NCPC, and Cisco Systems, an internet hardware developer. But our team grew pretty quickly. We added several new members along the way, including several more district agencies and the Golden Triangle bid, which turned out to be a key team member for us because our project is located in that Golden Triangle area. Once the pilot was completed, this team became Smarter DC to scale the project to other locations around the city. So the project was carried out in phases. The first phase was basically creating at least trying to adopt an public Wi-Fi. That was accomplished by using smart lighting. Smart lighting places Wi-Fi receivers in the streetlights along Pennsylvania Avenue, creating a mesh network. So as a user walks along the avenue, he stays continuously connected to the internet, being passed from sensor to sensor as he moves along. The mesh network was then backhauled or connected to the internet through a fiber cable, and that allowed us to create hundreds of applications from one sensor. So we had sensors that create security analytics, traffic analytics, parking, maintenance, and hundreds of other types of applications from one server, from one sensor. So the second phase of the project was basically implementation. The majority of the year was spent pulling permits, trenching for the fiber network, and adding sensors for the street lights. And as I mentioned, the project is located on the west end of Pennsylvania Avenue. This is a view of the existing conditions looking west along Pennsylvania Avenue. Our mesh network and sensors could easily enhance any new streetscape design that was developed for this area, and allow for a better integration of smart technology with good urban design and planning principles. This is the proposed streetscape design for the west end of Pennsylvania Avenue. It's cheated a little bit over towards the sidewalk, but it's still looking west. And this is the same view with the overlay of our sensors within the design scheme. So from one source, there's many applications that can be created: parking, climate, air, water, wayfinding, trash removal, and manhole cover alarms and more. And we're not just talking about random technology being applied to the area. The technology that's there is tied directly to the design. So it enhances what's going on with the actual streetscape design, and it gives another layer of experience to the user. So when was the project launched? PA 2040 was kicked off in October of 2016. These are images from that launch event. The mayor, Mr. Acosta, the CEO of Cisco Systems, Chuck Robbins, all attended the event and gave a little presentation. At the same time, the district was named the first Lighthouse City, and this is a sign of the city's commitment to smart cities technology and Cisco Systems' commitment to supporting smart cities projects within the district. So just to give you an idea of what our partners are continuing to work on and give you a sense of what's going on with PA 2040, some of our teammates from GW are still adding new arrays of environmental and other types of sensors to the project. These images show a Intel sensor kit, which was provided by the Global Cities Teams Challenge that the students from GW have used to teach the Internet of Things introductions to high school students here in the district. We're passing around one of those sensor kits. The idea of this thing is that this is something they pass out at the beginning of the Global Cities Teams Challenge, so when architects and planners and other non-engineers come in, they can get a sense of how to program some of these tools. So this is a very simple kit, very simple sensors in there, but once you start with it, it's pretty easy to get a sense of how this thing works. There's also an array of things that the students from GW created down here at the bottom left of the screen. This is an idea that came from the University of Chicago, but the GW students were able to build it at a much more inexpensive cost. And then a sensor from Advance, which is another environmental sensor that the students from GW have been using in the PA 2040 pilot project. So NCPC's ongoing smart cities work, we are continuing to try to create pilot projects, but a big part of making these projects happen is funding. We've endorsed the Smarter DC team by submitting project team support documents for grant proposals with the district government. We've advanced smart city proposals through GSA's Emerging Technology Community of Practice. We've developed a white paper on integrating emerging technology with monuments and memorials, and contributed to smart city solutions and public hackathons and co-design workshops that relate to visitor experience and community planning. These two images, the upper image is from the D.H Street hackathon, looking at using smart technology for off-boarding streetcar fare payments. And the image at the bottom is a co-design workshop led by the National Park Service, looking at visitor experience elements for the Lincoln Memorial Rehabilitation Project. And so, next steps, we're still trying to integrate Smart Cities technology policy into the comprehensive plan federal elements. Currently, we're looking at the transportation element and the urban design element. We're going to attend the Smart and Secure Cities Communities Challenge kickoff next month. This is the next version of the Global Cities Teams Challenge. This year it's being coordinated with the Department of Homeland Security and looking at more security solutions. And we'll continue working with the Federal Emerging Technologies Community of Practice on artificial intelligence, virtual and augmented realities to build a smart city solutions to meet the current administration's goals. We're also exploring using emerging technology to improve the visitor experience in the city. At the original project kickoff, one of the things we introduced was an idea called Walking with the Presidents. This will be an immersive virtual tour led by past the current president. But the idea is to move visitors from the mall to other civic locations off the mall and into downtown. So this gives you a better idea of what that's about. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation, unless you have any questions for me. Where are the pink parrots? Kind of like the pink parrot thing, right?
That's all I want, the pink.
No physical robots here. Everything's virtual.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walton.
Okay.
Do we have questions for Mr. Walton? Actually, Commissioner White, you had expressed interest in the topic. Would you like to start the discussion?
Well, I'm delighted, and you're so enthusiastic with the presentation. And I'm wondering, based on this experience, what are you excited about in the next phase of this? I think about the pink parrots too, Commissioner Shaw, sort of the temporary monuments. The Wi-Fi was really interesting, but where do you see its application, or is it too soon to say?
I don't think it's too soon to say. First of all, I was very happy that you asked about this, because no one ever asked about these types of things. I was happy to get in here and be able to talk about it for a few minutes. But I think one of the grant proposals that we supported the district on was for a power grant, and this is for high-speed internet, high-speed downloads. So right now, download speeds for, I guess, high-speed downloads are about 10 gigabits per second. And so to do something like this virtual sort of presidential tour guide thing, you probably need 100 gigabyte downloads. So that's what the power grant is about, trying to speed up internet downloads. So maybe doing a pilot around a virtual sort of application could be fun. I'm not really sure that everyone sees that as being the first thing you want to do when you play with these types of tools, but I think it would be interesting.
Can I ask a quick question, Mr. Chairman?
Please, absolutely.
First of all, I think this is dynamic and very exciting. There's just no question about it. And if I'm not mistaken, the Office of Planning was also one of the sponsors on this, as was the Southwest bid.
Yes.
Huge. But the issue is, doesn't this technology, as you're putting Wi-Fi and high-speed Wi-Fi all around, doesn't that then directly connect to autonomous vehicles?
Yes.
I mean, isn't that how they can actually maneuver around, because they can't be interrupted, right?
Right.
You have to have redundancy, and so all of that sits into a whole transportation smart city, not just data collection and walking around.
Right, so I've been to a couple of conferences, and I've heard some folks talk about that. And so what you're talking about is vehicle-to-vehicle, or vehicle-to-infrastructure sort of communication. And so, yeah, they're talking about a whole bandwidth that we dedicated just to doing that type of work, which I think could impact NCPC. Maybe that bandwidth is a public bandwidth, and that's where you put your virtual presidents, and maybe we'd have authority over.
I think it's exciting. It's very exciting. I think where we'll see it, NCPC, is we'll have to be approving those antennas and boxes on federal view sheds.
Yeah, I purposely didn't put any of those antennas in the presentation because I don't want to talk about that.
That's right.
Yeah, I was wondering why they were missing.
Yeah.
Do we have other questions or comments? Sure.
Feeling engaged today. The hope would be also that we, when I'm going to look at Commissioner Dixon and where are the other federal properties, OP's working with the Smithsonian Anacostia Museum right now. We know the Oval's being completed in time for the baseball thing that what's the thing? The All-Star game. That it might be worth us sort of being more intentional and figuring out a place where we want to sort of like start off a federal asset that's new with this always there. So I would encourage us to maybe look at the Oval as one, because the soccer stadium, baseball stadium will be done on a main South Capitol axis, but there might be some siting we want to do looking forward on that. Yeah, with a lot. Yeah.